Those are our impressions of Resident Evil Requiem based on our demo that we played here at Summer Game Fest. If you want more on this game or anything that's been happening in the summer of gaming, stick with IGN.
Alyssa died 8 years ago. Perhaps it's time for you to face the past.
With the announcement trailer of Resident Evil Requiem, Capcom has provided some of the first hints about the story being told in the 9th mainline entry in the Resident Evil series. The trailer didn't include any of the series' familiar faces, but it did suggest that Requiem has ties with a lesser-known Resident Evil game from way back in the PlayStation 2 era. Outbreak was released in 2003 between Resident Evil 3 in 1999 and the franchise's semi-reboot with Resident Evil 4 in 2005, and shook up the series' formula up to that point. Instead of a single-player experience, Outbreak was Resident Evil's first major foray into online cooperative gameplay, with as many as 4 players fighting to survive the T-virus outbreak in Raccoon City that serves as the setting for Resident Evil 2 and 3. While Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and Jill Valentine were fighting for their lives in places like the Raccoon City Police Department, Outbreak puts players elsewhere in the city.
No, it can't be. So many.
Outbreak follows a group of residents as they suddenly find themselves in the thick of things as Raccoon City is overrun by zombies and, well, other mutated monstrosities. There's also a big emphasis on teamwork, using character-specific traits and abilities alongside Resident Evil's survival horror elements, like limited inventory space, slow-moving characters, and largely fixed camera angles to encourage players to work together to survive. Outbreak also introduced an insidious element to players' fight for survival. Characters are all infected with one of Umbrella's deadly monster-making viruses at the start of each of the game's levels. The infection rate in each character increases over time and ramps up even faster when they take damage, forcing players to search for antiviral items. If the virus overtakes a character, well, they transform into zombies themselves and attack their former allies. It's a little bit difficult to get a complete story picture from Outbreak or its sequel, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, which featured the same cast of characters. The games each include a series of 5 scenarios, with players picking from the 8 possible survivors and trying to make their way through a level. But the scenarios aren't presented in chronological order, or even necessarily linked together as a coherent story. One scenario has characters drinking in Jay's bar in Raccoon City when the first zombies stumble in and starts biting people, for instance, while another scenario finds the survivors stumbling into an underground Umbrella lab, working through the Raccoon City Zoo filled with mutated animals, or making their way into the Arkley Mountains and eventually to a hospital overrun by a giant murderous plant. But thanks to the trailer for Resident Evil Requiem, we know that at least some of what takes place in Outbreak and File 2 is now canonical to the Resident Evil series, and important to the events of the next game. The Requiem trailer begins by introducing FBI analyst Grace Ashcroft, a new character to the series as she receives an assignment to investigate the Wrenwood Hotel. We quickly learn that Grace's mother, Alyssa Ashcroft, was murdered at the hotel 8 years earlier. Alyssa was one of the playable characters in the Outbreak games, and they give a little backstory about her that might inform what we see in Requiem. In Outbreak, Alyssa is a reporter and you can find her bylines in the newspapers, the Daily Raccoon, and Comet News. She's presented as a dedicated investigator, but her dialogue suggests that because of the Umbrella Corporation's control and influence in Raccoon City, she hasn't always been able to publish pieces that could have exposed the company's wrongdoing. In the sequel, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, there's an Alyssa-focused level that gives a greater sense of her work as a journalist, as well as the lengths Umbrella has gone to in order to cover up its crimes. The scenario, Flashback, finds Alyssa and the other survivors heading into a private hospital in the Arkley Mountains outside of the city. As she makes her way to the hospital, Alyssa keeps feeling like she's been to the place before as part of an article she was pursuing, but can't seem to remember the details. She later discovers, through flashbacks and files you uncover along the way, that she was right about that strange feeling.
Come on!
Years earlier, another journalist, Kurt, had become convinced doctors at the hospital were using Umbrella drugs to conduct illegal experiments on the patients there, and Alyssa followed him as he went there in search of evidence. In the course of his investigation, Alyssa saw Kurt eaten alive by one of the virus-infected patients. Umbrella then used its massive influence with police and local officials to cover up the deaths at the hospital, including Kurt's. Alyssa eventually remembers what happened to her through the course of flashback, and uncovers the truth of the experiments, including one performed by the hospital administrator on his own terminally ill wife, which led her to seemingly transform into the carnivorous plant that infests the hospital. Over the years, the administrator has been leading people who wander into the woods to the hospital, killing them and feeding them to the plant. Alyssa and the other survivors defeat the administrator and destroy the plant. And with her memory somewhat restored, Alyssa vows to spread the word of Umbrella's wrongdoing and what happened to Kurt. Other scenarios in both games have the survivors eventually curing their viral infection and escaping Raccoon City before the US government destroys it with a missile to contain the outbreak. You can see the missile crater in the Resident Evil Requiem trailer. In File 2, each character gets an epilogue scene if they make it out, and Alyssa's scene suggests that, like Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, she made it her mission to blow the whistle on Umbrella.
Playing it safe may be best, but that's not what I call truly living. Fight for what you want. There's always going to be risks. You may get hurt in the end. But for me, I'd rather die having lived than live without knowing life. And taking the risks that come with life is the only way to truly know it.
Eventually, she did write an article all about the horror she learned in Raccoon City, but in the end, the story is mostly buried, thanks to the cover-up perpetrated by the US government to hide its involvement with Umbrella and what happened in Raccoon City. It's not clear if any of the other Outbreak characters canonically survived Raccoon City, as Alyssa is the only one who's been mentioned in other games. You can even find an article she wrote in Resident Evil 7 detailing the many disappearances in Dolby Parish, Louisiana, where the game takes place. And now with her mention in Resident Evil Requiem, we know that, in the years after Raccoon City, she raised a daughter before she met her ultimate fate. Requiem's trailer suggests we'll learn more about Alyssa through Grace, as well as by heading to the hotel where she was murdered. The trailer also implies that Requiem might take players back to the ruins of Raccoon City, highlighting iconic locations like the Raccoon City Police Department. So while it's not clear now, it's possible other elements of Outbreak's story could also be relevant to what happens in Requiem, but we have to wait until its release in February to find out. Either way, it's cool to finally see the events of a less remembered Resident Evil game more or less canonized by the Resident Evil Requiem announcement. Furthermore, it appears that after detours in zombified Europe and the Deep South, Resident Evil is ready to head back to the city where it all began, Raccoon City. For more on Resident Evil, be sure to check out our hands-on preview of Capcom's 9th mainline Resident Evil game. For everything else, you're already in the right place with IGN.
The future. It isn't just a dream. It's a promise. One we're turning into reality. With our 3rd generation of Luna filament and advanced generative AI, we're reshaping the line between dreams and reality. We create life for our future. Delphi Corporation.
Now let's see about getting passed through to Earth. And why are these things trying to kill us?
There you are. All better.
You patched me up?
I am DI-03367. They are pragmatic.
Whoa, hang on a second. Don't you have a name or something? I'm good. Get behind me!
I think I can help.
Targets identified. Neutralizing threats.
Neutralize us?
Looks like we're gonna have to fight our way through. What the?
Bypassing first and second firewalls. Hooking control protocols. Initiating hack!
Hey, D.I.
I said I am D.I.
Okay. Look, how about we call you Diana?
Diana?
What's good, everyone? Michael here at Summer Game Fest, and I just played Pragmata, which is a new IP from Capcom. And let me tell you something, this might be my game of the show. So to give you a brief idea of what Pragmata is it's a third-person sci-fi action shooter. Now that doesn't sound too exciting or different right off the bat, but the key element here is the hacking ability. So the way this works is that you are playing as this mechanized super soldier guy who can shoot guns and you fight robots and all that, but you can't really damage the robots until you hack them. So there's this unnamed little girl who sits on your back, and what you do is when you aim down your sight, you lock in on an enemy, and then you have to do a really quick hacking puzzle. And when you do that hacking puzzle, you then expose a weakness of that enemy, and then you can actually inflict damage on them. So on top of that, there's also status effects that you can inflict on the enemies if you do the puzzle in a certain way. So you're not just like trying to get from one end to the other. It works like a flowchart puzzle, and you've got to get to the end of the puzzle really quickly to then expose them. So, but along that path, you can go in different directions along the hacking path to inflict specific status effects. And so it has this really dynamic element to combat. And I really like that little touch. It feels like, even though it doesn't sound like it's a game changer or whatever, it really does affect the dynamic and the flow of combat. And being able to engage the player in a new way, I think goes a long way for standing out. So you might look at this or look at a trailer and have really no idea what this game is about. If you just key in on that element, I think it's interesting enough to hook you in. Because I went into this having not really a good idea of what Pragmata was, but just having that gameplay element really hooked me in. So it's a pretty intense game too. When you have, you're fighting in pretty enclosed spaces, and you have these robots coming after you. But how you manage those combat scenarios can get really intense. Like, who do you hack first? Can you make sure that you initiate the hack in time before you get attacked by somebody else? And these are just kind of the smaller elements that really help the game feel exciting and feel dynamic, more so than just being a third-person shooter. There wasn't too much to share on the premise of the story. You don't really have a good idea of what's going on. That's just kind of the nature of playing an early build of a game, and there's some cinematics that tease what's going on here. I know, like at the end of this demo and some of the environmental storytelling and some of the notes that you can read along the way, you're on this high-tech facility on the moon, and I don't really know what's going on in that story, but it has me curious enough to see what else is being told in this story. But even if the story elements aren't really going to hook me, I think it's the action is enough to have me keeping my attention on this game. And I'll kind of want to know what the deal is with this little girl who has hacking abilities. I think that's kind of an interesting premise to this. What their dynamic is going to be throughout the story. The guy that you're controlling and this little girl who has super hacking abilities. But other than that, there isn't too much else I saw. It was a brief 15-20 minute demo. But just getting a little taste of that combat alone is enough for me to keep my eye on this. It's coming out in 2026. I really want to play more of this game. At the end of the demo, there was this big mech boss fight that started up, but that's where the demo ended. So they got me already, man. So I can't wait to see more of this game. It's coming out in 2026. And if you want to know more about Pragmata, be sure to stick with IGN.
After the massive success of both Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise, it makes sense that Capcom would do whatever it can to welcome that wider audience into the next frontier. That That's exactly what Monster Hunter Wilds does, smoothing out the already excellent process of turning big scary dragons into silly little hats to be faster, more flexible, and less fiddly than ever before. The other side of those dual blades, however, is that Wilds is light on any real challenge, even for what I'd expect at launch, never asking me to think hard about my equipment. But while the monsters may not pose much of a threat this time around, smart tweaks to combat still mean the act of carving them up has rarely felt better. My first surprise in Wilds was that the campaign isn't just a totally forgettable excuse to kill anything that crosses your path this time. Okay, it's still mostly that as you explore yet another uncharted land to solve some mystery, but while the story itself isn't particularly fresh, the difference here is that the characters within it are actually pretty great. Whether it's the excitable engineer Gemma,
We are so gonna talk later, pal.
your empathetic handler Alma,
Oh, but I've definitely heard of him.
or the total space cadet of a biologist Eric,
This forest is amazing.
your team is full of likable personalities and little character arcs throughout the gorgeously animated cutscenes.
See? Told you they'd be fine.
And that was enough to get me more invested. The revamped structure of Wilds also means that campaign is significantly shorter than I was expecting. I reached the credits in just 15 hours and didn't have to fight a single monster twice in that time, getting enough materials from any initial encounters to keep my gear up to snuff and jump right from one mission to the next. When you compare that to the 40 plus hours it took to see the end of the story and world, it feels like the intent is to allow more people to quote-unquote beat Wilds. And I certainly appreciate how that shift toward approachability might appeal to anyone who has been traditionally intimidated by the series. But as a veteran, I can't help but be a little disappointed that I literally didn't get knocked out once in that entire time. There's never a skill or armor testing wall of a monster that forced me to really consider my equipment choices more deeply in order to earn the reward of a hard-fought victory. Avoiding spoilers, there is, of course, more to do once you get past the credits. That's where the larger changes Wilds makes to the traditional Monster Hunter loop really start to shine. Gone are the days of returning to a separate town between every hunt, then going down the same checklist of tasks before you're ready for the next one. Pretty much everything you need is out in the field with you, and you're never more than a lickety-split loading screen away from whichever beautiful area you want to be in. Convenient adjustments are all over the place, like food buffs being tied to a timer now that sticks around between hunts. It doesn't even tick down while in camp, making a previously repetitive process substantially smoother without removing the depth it added to hunts.
Nothing like home cooking.
The roaringly successful result of those changes is that a vast majority of the friction past games could produce as you start and stop and restart between every encounter has been removed. Now you can just check your map for monster information and go hunt. The monsters you'll face are also generally excellent. That could be a flashy newcomer like the flamenco-inspired Lalabarina, or Wild's headliner Arkveld and its chain-like appendages. But the true stunner has to be New Udra. The tentacles of Monster Hunter's first octopus-like creature can be as unpredictable to contend with as you might expect, especially when they're literally on fire. And the satisfaction of severing every single one of them over the course of a hunt is second to none. The appeal of Monster Hunter's fights has always been how it empowers you with flashy moves and hard-hitting attacks. But knowing when to strike and where to stand and how the monster will behave next is just as important as figuring out which buttons to press. That's true in Wilds too, but combat is also more flexible and forgiving here. For example, you can adjust your footing a little more mid-combo, resulting in fewer moments where a mistimed attack with a long animation had me embarrassingly slicing at the air. In many ways, the combat feels like it's all about the new wound system this time. Wounds open up once you deal enough damage to a given body part, and then you'll deal extra damage when attacking them. But deal enough damage to a wound and it'll break, resetting that spot. Every weapon also has a simple to execute focus strike that will deal a burst of damage to a wound and break it right away. So maximizing the amount of time you leave one open and then using that finisher before it closes naturally is an interesting subgame to manage. Or at least it would be if Wilds ever presented me with a challenge that pushed me to make those considerations. Whether I was playing online or solo, I've never had a mission reach the 20-minute mark, and I've only fainted 2 times total across dozens of hours. Compare that to World, which had real tests like Kieran, who smacked me silly my first couple of attempts, forcing me to regroup and craft an armor set around thunder resistance, and it's hard not to feel like Capcom's desire to make this a more inviting Monster Hunter sanded off some of the bumps I actually enjoyed in terms of overcoming big threats. Things do ramp up a little bit in the post-game, but even there I only really had to worry about upgrading my armor or falling behind in damage once or twice during the content that's available at launch. After the 15 hours it took me to beat the campaign, I only had to spend another 15 to finish every side quest that wasn't about catching fish, and just 5 more after that before I had the best armor set and weapon I could get and a pretty solid suite of skill-boosting decorations. To be fair, I still have plenty more equipment I could grind for, but my usual desire to get the top-tier weapon of each elemental type and put together specialized outfits for certain challenging fights just isn't here this time, because those fights aren't here either. I think a lot of this comes down to raw numbers that could hypothetically be tweaked in one of the many patches that are sure to come, but some of what makes things so easy also seems to be baked into the bones of Wilds. For example, nearly every time you focus strike a wound, the monster gets locked into a little stagger animation, and you'll be breaking wounds a lot. Meanwhile, on the crafting side of things, my hunt for the best armor was way shorter than I ever expected because materials that are usually super rare can sometimes show up as guaranteed rewards when looking at the monster list on your map. That was excitingly convenient initially, but it's also what brought that loot chase to an almost trivially fast end.
Perfection.
I imagine this difficulty tuning will get a lot more people through the front door, but it also means that where my past 3 Monster Hunter reviews wrapped up around the 50 to 60 hour mark while I still had plenty more I was excited to do, I started losing steam with Wilds before I even hit 40. Don't get me wrong, that's still a healthy chunk of game, and it has absolutely been some of the most fun I've had with the series. I'm also sure any longtime fans will be thinking, well, we just have to wait for updates or G-Rank or whatever for the real challenge. But in that regard, Capcom's own roadmap has left me wary. There's only 1 monster scheduled to be added for all of spring, and then only 1 currently listed for summer. In contrast, Rise also felt slight at launch, but got 6 new monsters just 1 month later, and then 3 more a month after that. Wilds already feels like it needs endgame threats like its formidable Elder Dragons to really push its limits. And if it instead only gets 1 returning monster in the first 3 or so months after launch, this could be a long wait until its inevitable expansion. That all said, Wilds deserves credit for being what has got to be one of the most customizable games I have ever played. There's a huge host of accessibility features. You can adjust the size of or turn off individual elements on your UI, you have more control than ever over your menus and radio wheels, and you can alter the look of stuff like your mount, chat stickers, and even fast travel tents to a surprising degree. As a crowning touch, you can finally wear any version of each armor set too, essentially doubling the cosmetic options previously available as you get into the all-important fashion side of things towards the end. Partying up online has also been made more robust, letting you run around each map with your friends and seamlessly flow from hunt to hunt without having to regroup at camp between each mission. And even if you're largely planning to play solo, there are quality of life changes here for you too. That could be the surprisingly competent AI support hunters that fill empty spots in your party when you fire an SOS flare, but also the inclusion of an online single-player option that lets you fire flares to get help, but still pause the action entirely before you do. Monster Hunter Wilds continues to smooth off the rougher corners of the series in smart ways, reducing as much friction as possible that could get in the way of you grabbing any of its exceptionally fun weapons and planting them firmly in a monster's hide. But in that quest to make Monster Hunter more approachable, Wilds is sliced a little too close to the bone in some places, trimming its challenge back so much that I barely needed to engage with its in-depth equipment system at all this time to become an apex predator. Its more flexible combat is still some of the most fun I've had with the series, but like the blustering lightning storms of its gorgeous desert, it burns brightly but briefly until Capcom unleashes some real endgame beasts to challenge us. For more, check out our reviews of Avowed or Like a Dragon, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. And for everything else, Stick with IGN.
Wow, that's big. Aha, finally we get to a thrusting weapon. And you know, in my opinion, this is actually the most appropriate. Hi there, I'm Matt Easton of Scholar Gladiatoria, and I teach people how to sword fight. I also do things like TV and film stuff, and I work with the Royal Armouries on accurate replicas of real swords. And I'm an antique arms and armour dealer. And today I'm going to be looking at some of the weapons and equipment from Monster Hunter Wilds. That is a really big piece of steel. Moving steel, even when it's bright glowing red orange, is not that easy. So that is going to take a lot of work to move that amount of metal. Right, okay, so they do say forge thick, grind thin. So that is a thick piece of metal she's grinding on there. For real world physics, this would be a really, really heavy piece of metal to be working on a grinding wheel. But fundamentally, they have represented the correct order of things. So first of all, you forge your blade to an approximate shape, and then you grind away the surface material to get to the more precise shape. So she's kind of doing the right things. It's a very big grinding wheel. Grinding wheels like that did exist in the medieval period. They've, in fact, all the way out to the Roman period. And in fact, what a lot of people don't know is in the medieval period, many of these wheels, whether you're talking about Europe or Japan or China, many of these wheels were actually powered, usually water powered. So you might have heard of a water mill, but they could be powered in other ways. And we even see hand cranked ones. So sometimes someone's job is just to crank the wheel. Wow, that's big. Is this supposed to be made of bone? It is a massive, massive blade. So I think within the parameters of this particular game, we have to assume that the people have super strength, because there is no way on Earth that a human in our universe could fight with a sword of that size and subsequent weight. Right, okay, so looking at the weapon here being held, so it's a two-handed weapon, so they're standing in a convincing position with their feet widespread to balance out the heavy weight of that sword. Now, I do understand these weapons are fantasy, and they're also for fighting monsters, and we have to accept that weapons like this Viking-era sword here were designed not for fighting monsters, but for fighting humans. And obviously for fighting humans, you want certain characteristics of a weapon. You want it to be very wieldable and quick, can be used in conjunction with things like shields, because humans are going to shoot arrows and throw spears at you. It has to be fairly quick and nimble, and it only needs to be powerful enough to kill a human. And let's face it, a small knife can do that. Whereas in a world with monsters, if we are going monster hunting, or indeed having to defend ourselves from monsters, you would end up with different weapons being designed. In reality, if you wanted to make a weapon this big, you'd have to make the blade very, very thin to make it light enough to be able to wield. So one thing that some of you out there might be asking is, are weapons or swords or knives, have they ever been made of things like bone in the real world? And the answer's yes, all the way back into the mists of time. So the earliest spears that we know about simply have hardened wooden points on them. But then we also find antler-tipped spears and arrowheads, and in fact in some of the South Sea islands, all the way up to the 20th century, where they didn't have metal, or they weren't refining or obtaining metal, they actually made knives and swords using teeth from sharks. So you can find shark's teeth swords. Fundamentally, yes, organic materials like bone, tooth, and antler absolutely were used for edged and pointed weapons throughout history. So it's interesting, the construction, because how I would interpret this, it does actually have a logic to it. It looks like there's a metal back to the blade which holds the bone blade. Now that actually makes quite a lot of sense. So maybe what we saw being forged before was the metal hilt and holder for the bone blade, which would make sense. And it looks like there might be rivets holding the back of that kind of casing onto the blade. Now, this construction method is actually historical, and we find it on Indian swords. So if you look at a certain Indian sword called a khanda, then we in fact find this construction where the blade is connected to the hilt via a sort of casing fitment that goes up the back and around the bottom of the blade. So it's actually quite convincing.
Got it on the
So in terms of a sort of fighting style, this is very much a pick up the biggest object you can possibly swing and swing it as hard as you possibly can. And obviously the character here can jump very high as well, which is obviously very advantageous if you're fighting against giant creatures. Now, you could argue, is this a good tactic against a large monster, swinging a weapon like this? And personally, I would say no. Historically, when we look at people dealing with massive creatures, whether it's mammoths in prehistory or whether it's elephants in more recent history, what people generally do is they either use missile weapons, so very powerful bows, crossbows, harpoons, firearms, or if they're forced to use a hand weapon, then they tend to use large spears with thrusting. The reason for that is for a human-sized creature to swing a weapon hard enough to really injure, a big enough weapon to injure one of these massive creatures would be very difficult with a cutting mechanics. Whereas with thrusting, the weight and size, the mass and momentum of the creature actually works against it. The weapon will drive more deeply into the body of a massive creature. So something like a spear, lance, harpoon, generally speaking, is a quicker way of finishing off a very large creature than a swung cutting weapon, which wouldn't go very deep. I do really appreciate the sense of mass and momentum happening here, the inertia of that massive blade. So although it's almost unbelievable that you could have a sword this kind of size, I do really appreciate that they have gone, okay, it is ludicrously heavy, but we're going to make the character move like they're swinging something ludicrously heavy. So it's this is a blocking move, which is really, really interesting idea because, of course, normally when we form guards and blocks with a sword, for example, but it could be a spear or a poleaxe or a quarterstaff, whatever, then we do, generally speaking, there's three main ways of dealing with an incoming attack. You either move out of the way of it, moving backwards or off to the side, but if you defend with the weapon, the two main ways are either interposing the weapon and putting it literally blocking in the way of the incoming thing. But against a massive creature like that with a huge amount of momentum, that might not be the best idea. So another option you have is deflection. In this particular case, this is a bit different because this is a massive monster hunting weapon. So actually you can hide behind it to an extent because it has such a lot of mass and size and width itself that you can literally hide behind that blade. So I actually really like how they've thought about this and adapted what you would do with this colossally massive, great chunk of a weapon. Well, first things first, I love the fact that the developers have actually thought about the issue of sharpening a blade. This is really, really rare in games, and I actually love that they considered that, because the fact is that these swords, they get worn down, they get chipped, they get nicks in the edge, they can get broken. Even if you're just hitting flesh and bone, the edges do get blunted on bone. Could you sharpen a bone blade with a piece of rock? I guess, but looking at the animation, it would really help if she was actually sharpening the edge. Instead of it looks like she's rubbing it along the flat of the blade. So, on one hand, you give with one, you take away with another. I think it's great that they thought about this, but I personally advise them to do a better job of the animation to actually make it look like sharpening, because you can sharpen anything with a rock if you know what you're doing, but you have to do it in the right way. Aha! Finally, we get to a thrusting weapon. And, in my opinion, for fighting monsters of this kind, this is actually the most appropriate type of weapon. A lot of the time, all you need to do with a massive spear like this is just hold it and let the animal run onto it. Let the animal essentially injure itself. It also keeps them further away, from you. This particular design looks funky as heck. It's like a giant cone. So lances, in reality, for jousting, didn't usually look like this. There were some particular type of really quite fat jousting lances, and some of those were partially hollow, I think, designed to break on impact. Why would this lance be so thick? We can only say it's for strength because of the nature of the creatures that it's being used against. My interpretation is that this large cone is designed that way for strength, but is probably predominantly hollow and therefore not that heavy. I do like one detail, that the tip is made of steel metal. You don't need anything behind that to to be made of heavy material. So you could make everything behind that of quite light organic material and just have the tip made of steel. Aha! So it makes perfect sense. This is being used as a mounted weapon. In this case, this is perfect. Absolutely perfect. You don't want to be trying to swing a massive sword around from horseback. Did people occasionally do that in history? Very occasionally, but not normally. So lances are really the best, or certainly one of the best weapons to use mounted. Brilliant. I love the fact that this is a hat tip to history and logic, frankly. Physical, just basic science and logic, that they're using a lance and a shield when mounted. Great. Oh, I really liked that right at the end there, it looked like the person put their lance up and the creature fell down onto the end of it. And in my opinion, that would be the best way to do this. So it seems like a much more efficient way of letting the creature kill itself. Oh, right. Okay, so these are pretty cool looking swords. I really like the look of these. Now, I would say these look more like weapons for fighting humans rather than monsters. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, they're more reasonably sized. They're the normal size of a sword. But there's a couple of other reasons as well. Firstly, if you look at the blade, it is a forward-facing edge like a sickle. So this actually has a real-world parallel with a historical and surviving type of African weapon called a shotel. Okay, now a shotel actually has its primary edge on the inner face and curving forward exactly like this. It is said that the primary purpose of a shotel is to strike around the edge of an opponent's shield. It's really, really clever. So as you swing the weapon, the person puts their shield up in the way, but the curved blade comes over the top anyway and hits them in the face. It works really well against humans and particularly against defensive tactics, but it seems a bit like not necessary against monsters, and also you're going to be limited to the amount of penetration you can get on a large, massive creature. Okay, so we see the slow attack there is to spin around like a great big Catherine wheel. This is obviously part of the game and the way that the fighting the creatures works in this game. I'm not going to critique that. It's fantasy, it's fun, it looks awesome actually. In the real world, spinning is usually not a way of attacking because turning your back on an opponent is usually not the best thing to do. However, there are some specific tactical exceptions to that, so I'm not going to be overly critical of that. The only thing I would say is these are very little weapons, and particularly with that curved blade, I'm not sure how effective these would be against a massive dragon-like armoured scaly creature like this lizard. In that sense, although these are more realistic weapons, in a sense they're almost a less realistic choice of weapon to go against a monster like this. I'd rather have just a normal spear, to be honest. Aha! So, a gun lance. I absolutely love this, and do you know what? Maybe not everyone watching this video realizes this is essentially a real thing, okay? If you think about it, a bayonet on a rifle is a gun lance, okay? We also find certain combination weapons, we know them as. So, for example, you can find from the Tudor period onwards, a mace combined with a firearm. And also, going all the way forward to the 19th century, you sometimes find officers' swords like this, fitted with a pistol on the side. So combination weapons are a real thing. Most of them are kind of gimmicky, but the musket and bayonet, an absolute world beater. All right, okay. I've got a problem with this bow. So when we were looking at the giant swords, I kind of go, okay, well, these people are super strong. That's why they can use these giant, ludicrous, gigantic swords. But the bow, the problem is we're dealing with other physics. And the problem here is you've got limbs. So the limbs of the bow are the bits above and below the grip. Now, these limbs have to be able to flex, and they have to be able to recover back to their resting position. That is what shoots an arrow. If I was going to excuse this from a world-building fantasy point of view, I guess we can say that those are some sort of laminated mechanical limbs that are hugely powerful, require a huge amount of power to draw, and yes, they are inefficient, but they still have a huge amount of power going into them, a bit like a Roman ballista, maybe, and therefore, it's still an effective bow. Let's have a look. Yeah, okay, so the arrow being shot is a spear, and I've got to say, okay, kind of kudos here. This is essentially at this point akin to a Roman ballista. So Roman ballistas shoot massive bolts or arrows, which are about the size of a spear. They shoot quite a long way, but they hit with a huge amount of energy. So yeah, okay, this is basically a hand-drawn ballista. Fine, I can buy into that. It looks cool. Aha! So it's a kind of glaive. So it's got a chopping blade at one end, and we do actually find some polearm blades that look a bit like that historically. And at the other end, it has what looks like a melon with a spike coming out to the end. So I imagine these are all made of body parts. This is a blunt-ended cutting blade, so it's a bit like a sword. So it's going to be used somewhat like a sword, except that it's double-ended. So the other end is like a mace, one end's like a sword, and you've got a pointy end. This doesn't seem like a very sensible weapon for fighting large creatures to me. It's fun, don't get me wrong, it looks fun, I like the design, but it wouldn't make an awful lot of sense fighting large creatures. Why not have a good thrusting point? You could make a weapon that was longer, lighter, more nimble, with a deeper penetrating thrust. Let's see how it's used. Okay, spinny. So it's being used rather like a Chinese wushu staff. So one problem with using cutting polearms, which have a round shaft, is what we call edge alignment. So it's very important with an edged weapon to hit with the edge. Surprise, surprise, the sharp edge is the bit which cuts. If you hit things with the flat, or even at, and I'm being careful because this is actually a sharp sword, if you hit at a slight angle, you're not going to cut, or at least you're not going to cut very much. So edge alignment is rather difficult, and I would say for this particular weapon, because it has defined edges to use, it should really have an octagonal or hexagonal or even rectagonal shaft, so you can feel the edge alignment, what's called indexing. Index the edge in your hand without having to look at the weapon. So I think this weapon would be a nightmare to use. Really difficult to get that edge aligned. It doesn't have a really good thrusting point at either end. It's got a short one at the back end, but that mace end that looks like a melon is not really going to do much at all.
You did it!
So this looks like an absolutely fun game to play. I'm going to have to give it a try and learn a bit more about these weapons. In terms of the weapons, I found the swords somewhat ridiculous from a natural real sword perspective, but I understand this is a game about slaying monsters, and it has to look a certain way on screen, so it's fine. I did particularly love actually the use of the lance, and of all of the things we looked at today, the use of the lance from a mounted monster, essentially from riding a creature of your own, would definitely, I think, be the most convincing way that we've seen today for taking out some of these creatures, because you've got more momentum, you've got the momentum of the creature you're sitting on, you've got a piercing weapon which can go very deep into the target, you don't have to swing something around, you get the creature to run fast and then you skewer the thing, so very convincing. The only thing I would wish that we had seen a little bit more of was a little bit of using weapons in more of an ambush scenario, whereby you actually get to the right position to tempt the creature to charge at you, and then you plant the weapon and let them skewer themselves on it, because that would clearly, if you were on foot, be the best way of dealing with creatures of this size.
For even more expert reacts, make sure to check out Matt Easton reacting to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Or for more Monster Hunter, why not watch our Wilds review?
Welcome to the street! Hope you'll put up a fight! I am the pride of the Shiranui!
I'm here to help!
This fight's over! The joy of life can't be beat! Let's go!
Let's rumble. Alex. Ingrid.
That was crazy.
Forgot. Street Fighter 6.
Time for us to dance! That's correct! Let's dance up a sweat!
Japan.
Now it's time to pick up the pace!
Here comes a new challenger. Elena wins.
Sir.
Grace! Grace! Grace Ashcroft.
Yes?
My office.
Oh, coming. If this is about the report you asked for yesterday, it'll be ready in 3. No, 2 days, tops.
Put a hold on that for now. We found another body. One that exhibits the same pathology as the others we've been investigating. Now I need a good technical analyst on this.
Okay.
I need your eyes on the crime scene. The Renwood Hotel. I know that's where your mother was murdered. Alyssa died 8 years ago. Perhaps it's time for you to face the past. Grace.
What is this? Hey!
Stay close. They're coming. But you're the one that I've been searching for. The special one. The chosen one. Miss Ashcroft.
Investigating all these strange deaths, huh?
We need to keep our voices down.
Have you seen the same shit I've seen?
Please know that you are my hope.
Everyone's gone.
Get away from that!
What's good, everyone? Michael and Matt here at Summer Game Fest, and we just played Resident Evil Requiem. We don't have too much to show on video for you, but we do want to talk about our gameplay experience. So, Matt, can you walk us through what we played?
Yeah, it was a very scary demo. It was about 30 minutes, and we took control of the new protagonist, Grace Ashcroft, who is a FBI investigator. And obviously, you know, she wakes up in this spooky abandoned hospital where all sorts of you know, gore and gutsy viscera things seem to have happened, but we don't really know the full story. We just know that she wakes up in this abandoned looking hospital. It's very scary, and as she sort of explores these hallways, you know, in the nurses' stations, there's like blood everywhere, but it's also very like Resident Evil-y, you know, so there's like gothic architecture in random places where you don't expect them. Like the doors have like marble statues for, you know, I don't know, it's a very fancy hospital, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me a lot of Resident Evil 7 in that way. And, you know, Resident Evil 8 felt, I don't want to say whimsical, but there was something about that game kind of took the edge off a little bit more. There's a little bit more action, but I think my impression of this gameplay demo is that it kind of reels it back to the feeling of RE7. And the one thing I want to say about Grace Ashcroft as a character is that as I played the demo, I felt her fear as well. When you could hear it in her expressions and in her voice, and the way she moves, you know, even went through from previous games, I didn't really get a real serious gauge of his personality. But right off the bat with Grace in the opening cutscene that you see, and then even in the trailer, when you see her, like she's an FBI investigator and like the remnants of her mom she's going to investigate. So you know she's involved on some level, but you know, one of the things that was mentioned to us is that, you know, even though she is an agent, she knows how to handle a gun. This is all unfamiliar territory for her. So getting that sense of fear and some of the jump scares and some of the atmospheric horror elements of this game are also expressed through the character. So I really like that as a touch.
Yeah, it was. So you touched on a little bit, but in the trailer, you know, she's like introduced, like surrounded by books and her dossiers and things like that, and you can get the sense that she's kind of like a bookworm, and that comes through in the gameplay. You know, like she is not like a Leon Kennedy where she's like a super agent spy butt kicker, right? Like you can hear her sort of taking like calming breaths, you know, as she like sees like scary hallway, you know, like, you know, scary things in the hallway, right? She goes like, who, you know, and it gets like a real sense of like terror in there, which is really
a lot of dread.
Yeah, a lot of dread.
Yeah, and playing through the demo too, there's the traditional Resident Evil foundation there, where you're investigating the environment, this, you know, environmental storytelling and puzzles, and, you know, I need to find this item to open this thing, which gets me this other item so I can progress. So it still has that familiar Resident Evil foundation. But even like through that, you know, even though I kind of know what the moment to moment is like for a modern Resident Evil game, there's still creative ways in which they kind of, you know, keep you on your toes. And although like there isn't much we can show, there is another monster that will be chasing me around in this game, in the same vein as a Mr. X or a Nemesis or a Lady Dimitrescu. Like there's still that there as well. But the hard part to talk about is because we don't have a lot of context. Like you said, we jump into the demo without much story with that, but you still get a sense of what's going on by investigating like notes laid on tables and looking at some of the things that are on the floor in and around the environment. And you know, once you get out of once you start demo, there's like a note where it's like taking like a timetable, you know, like at 14 minutes her blood like was changing, but then she start going hail or whatever. So I'm guessing that, you know, something's going on with Grace, and I'm expecting to see her evolve as a character, with her being like, I suppose she's being the subject of what's going on in Requiem. That's just kind of speculation, but that's kind of like the fun part of games like Resident Evil, where you inspect the environment and you kind of like come up with your idea of where the game is going. So of what I'm looking at.
Oh yeah, like she's a new character, and we don't know, we don't know too much about her yet, right? But we do know that she has ties to her mom, who is in Resident Evil Outbreak, and so there's like a legacy element there. But yeah, as far as characters go, like this is a new entry into the Resident Evil canon for us, and so I'm really excited to find out more about her, find out more about her backstory, find out like how she connects to the overall Umbrella conspiracy of it all. I think, should we talk about the sort of question that I'm sure everybody has about this game, where is it first person or is it third person? And the answer is it's both.
Yeah, it's both. So the way it works is that in the menu you can choose first person or third person, and Capcom has been testing this out with like the Resident Evil Village DLC, so it's not unfamiliar. No, obviously the RE remakes that we've gotten in the past are all third person, but with this one, it's that slower paced RE7, RE8 formula, but with that third person mode, it does change the experience quite a bit. And like that's not surprising, but actually jumping between those, it's like, oh, okay, when I'm sneaking around trying to get around this monster that's chasing me, third person is like super useful. And making sure I'm sneaking around, peeping around corners, I don't have to like expose myself in that sense. But when I'm looking at things in the environment, I like going back to first person. Yeah, so the thing I'm hung up on is that switching between them has to be done through the menu. And do wish there was a way to like click a stick and then it'll change view. I know there's technical limitations to what you can do with that in that regard, but at least you do have the option for this one. So first person mode, maybe get motion sick a little bit, that is definitely a thing that can happen. So you can kick it to third person and it'll be fine, but either way, yeah, I think it's still a pretty eerie experience. It's a very dreadful experience.
No, you touched on it, right? Like, I think there's like it's interesting, right? Because there's they talked about how this is going to be survival horror at its core, and that's going to be a very scary and spooky game like the last couple of games. But there's going to be a little more actiony, and I feel like that comes true with the perspective shift. In first person, it is full throttle. It is so scary in first person, especially when the giant monster is chasing you, right? But in third person, you got a little like new element of like stealth action, coming in, and that is introduced just by perspective change. And I like how like it, regardless of which perspective you choose, like it's detailed in both ways, right? Like the character animations in third person perspective, it looks really cool and really fluid. But in first person, you get the upfront or the in your face, like action of it all. And so it's a really cool way to play the game, and especially like swapping back and forth, you get two different flavors of the game while playing the same demo. But you're right, I do wish there was like a sort of like seamless way that you can change between the two, like in Fallout. Sure, yeah. But for now though, I just really appreciate that you are able to get both, and that regardless of how you prefer your Resident Evil, whether you're a first person enjoyer or a third person enjoyer, you get a really good version of both.
Yeah. I guess the last thing that I'm thinking of is how this is going to fit into the rest of the Resident Evil lore, what story they're trying to tell. Of course, you mentioned Grace's mom is a character from Resident Evil Outbreak, and what's the connection there, of course, is what we're wondering. And also, this is ostensibly Resident Evil 9. I mean, this is no secret. Why is it toying with us with like the key art? So Resident Evil Raccoon, Resident Evil 9. How this is going to tie back to Village, and even 7. Yeah. Those things are always some of my favorite elements of the Resident Evil franchise as a whole, is all these different connections there. And I have a sneaking suspicion that, not to say that Village didn't have like an extensive story, but I do think there's a little bit more emphasis, judging from the trailer, and some of like the emphasis on Grace as a character, more so than like Ethan Winters felt like a kind of stand-in. Yeah. And like, his story did evolve once it got towards the end of Village, of course, but it feels like right out of the gate they're really highlighting Grace as a character in this game. So I'm looking forward to how that's going to play out.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Like, I think 7 and 8 in particular with Ethan, it kind of felt like a side adventure. There was like the Umbrella connection, and there was Chris Redfield who appeared in Village, but it really felt like Ethan sort of like went off on his own and had this like, and it like brought in the world of Resident Evil, so to speak. But yeah, with this new game, it's like back, I think it's back in Raccoon City. That's what the trailer seems to imply. We don't know for sure. It seems like there's some like direct connections to the events of Resident Evil 2, and so it kind of feels like you're getting sucked back into the sort of like main storyline.
So those are our impressions of Resident Evil Requiem based on our demo that we played here at Summer Game Fest. If you want more on this game or anything that's been happening in the summer of gaming, stick with IGN.
Alyssa died 8 years ago. Perhaps it's time for you to face the past.
With the announcement trailer of Resident Evil Requiem, Capcom has provided some of the first hints about the story being told in the 9th mainline entry in the Resident Evil series. The trailer didn't include any of the series' familiar faces, but it did suggest that Requiem has ties with a lesser-known Resident Evil game from way back in the PlayStation 2 era. Outbreak was released in 2003 between Resident Evil 3 in 1999 and the franchise's semi-reboot with Resident Evil 4 in 2005, and shook up the series' formula up to that point. Instead of a single-player experience, Outbreak was Resident Evil's first major foray into online cooperative gameplay, with as many as 4 players fighting to survive the T-virus outbreak in Raccoon City that serves as the setting for Resident Evil 2 and 3. While Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and Jill Valentine were fighting for their lives in places like the Raccoon City Police Department, Outbreak puts players elsewhere in the city.
No, it can't be. So many.
Outbreak follows a group of residents as they suddenly find themselves in the thick of things as Raccoon City is overrun by zombies and, well, other mutated monstrosities. There's also a big emphasis on teamwork, using character-specific traits and abilities alongside Resident Evil's survival horror elements, like limited inventory space, slow-moving characters, and largely fixed camera angles to encourage players to work together to survive. Outbreak also introduced an insidious element to players' fight for survival. Characters are all infected with one of Umbrella's deadly monster-making viruses at the start of each of the game's levels. The infection rate in each character increases over time and ramps up even faster when they take damage, forcing players to search for antiviral items. If the virus overtakes a character, well, they transform into zombies themselves and attack their former allies. It's a little bit difficult to get a complete story picture from Outbreak or its sequel, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, which featured the same cast of characters. The games each include a series of 5 scenarios, with players picking from the 8 possible survivors and trying to make their way through a level. But the scenarios aren't presented in chronological order, or even necessarily linked together as a coherent story. One scenario has characters drinking in Jay's bar in Raccoon City when the first zombies stumble in and starts biting people, for instance, while another scenario finds the survivors stumbling into an underground Umbrella lab, working through the Raccoon City filled with mutated animals, or making their way into the Ugly Mountains and eventually to a hospital overrun by a giant murderous plant. But thanks to the trailer for Resident Evil Requiem, we know that at least some of what takes place in Outbreak and File 2 is now canonical to the Resident Evil series, and important to the events of the next game. The Requiem trailer begins by introducing FBI analyst Grace Ashcroft, a new character to the series as she receives an assignment to investigate the Wrenwood Hotel. We quickly learn that Grace's mother, Alyssa Ashcroft, was murdered at the hotel 8 years earlier. Alyssa was one of the playable characters in the Outbreak games, and they give a little backstory about her that might inform what we see in Requiem. In Outbreak, Alyssa is a reporter, and you can find her bylines in the newspapers, the Daily Raccoon, and Comet News. She's presented as a dedicated investigator, but her dialogue suggests that because of the Umbrella Corporation's control and influence in Raccoon City, she hasn't always been able to publish pieces that could have exposed the company's wrongdoing. In the sequel, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, there's an Alyssa-focused level that gives a greater sense of her work as a journalist, as well as the lengths Umbrella has gone to in order to cover up its crimes. The scenario, Flashback, finds Alyssa and the other survivors heading into a private hospital in the Ugly Mountains outside of the city. As she makes her way to the hospital, Alyssa keeps feeling like she's been to the place before as part of an article she was pursuing, but can't seem to remember the details. She later discovers, through flashbacks and files you uncover along the way, that she was right about that strange feeling. Years earlier, another journalist, Kurt, had become convinced doctors at the hospital were using umbrella drugs to conduct illegal experiments on the patients there, and Alyssa followed him as he went there in search of evidence. In the course of his investigation, Alyssa saw Kurt eaten alive by one of the virus-infected patients. Umbrella then used its massive influence with police and local officials to cover up the deaths at the hospital, including Kurt's. Alyssa eventually remembers what happened to her through the course of flashback, and uncovers the truth of the experiments, including one performed by the hospital administrator on his own terminally ill wife, which led her to seemingly transform into the carnivorous plant that infests the hospital. Over the years, the administrator has been leading people who wander into the woods to the hospital, killing them and feeding them to the plant. Alyssa and the other survivors defeat the administrator and destroy the plant. And with her memory somewhat restored, Alyssa vows to spread the word of Umbrella's wrongdoing and what happened to Kurt. Other scenarios in both games have the survivors eventually curing their viral infection and escaping Raccoon City before the US government destroys it with a missile to contain the outbreak. You can see the missile crater in the Resident Evil Requiem trailer. In File 2, each character gets an epilogue scene if they make it out, and Alyssa's scene suggests that, like Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, she made it her mission to blow the whistle on Umbrella.
Playing it safe may be best, but that's not what I call truly living. Fight for what you want. There's always going to be risks. You may get hurt in the end. But for me, I'd rather die having lived than live without knowing life. And taking the risks that come with life is the only way to truly know it.
Eventually, she did write an article all about the horror she learned in Raccoon City, but in the end, the story is mostly buried, thanks to the cover-up perpetrated by the US government to hide its involvement with Umbrella and what happened in Raccoon City. It's not clear if any of the other Outbreak characters canonically survived Raccoon City, as Alyssa is the only one who's been mentioned in other games. You can even find an article she wrote in Resident Evil 7 detailing the many disappearances in Dolby Parish, Louisiana, where the game takes place. And now with her mention in Resident Evil Requiem, we know that, in the years after Raccoon City, she raised a daughter before she met her ultimate fate. Requiem's trailer suggests we'll learn more about Alyssa through Grace, as well as by heading to the hotel where she was murdered. The trailer also implies that Requiem might take players back to the ruins of Raccoon City, highlighting iconic locations like the Raccoon City Police Department. So while it's not clear now, it's possible other elements of Outbreak's story could also be relevant to what happens in Requiem, but we have to wait until its release in February to find out. Either way, it's cool to finally see the events of a less remembered Resident Evil game more or less canonized by the Resident Evil Requiem announcement. Furthermore, it appears that after detours in zombified Europe and the Deep South, Resident Evil is ready to head back to the city where it all began, Raccoon City. For more on Resident Evil, be sure to check out our hands-on preview of Capcom's 9th mainline Resident Evil game. For everything else, you're already in the right place with IGN.
Hello everyone! Welcome to Capcom Spotlight. For today's show, we'll be covering updates to games that are out now, plus new info on upcoming titles. This includes behind-the-scenes info from our developers, so be sure to watch until the end. Now, let's take a look at today's first title.
The future. It isn't just a dream. It's a promise. One we're turning into reality. With our 3rd generation of Luna filament and advanced generative AI, we're reshaping the line between dreams and reality. We create life for our future. Delphi Corporation.
Let's see about getting passed through to Earth. And why are these things trying to kill us?
There you are. All better.
messed me up.
I am DI-03367. They are pragmatic.
Whoa, hang on a second. Don't you have a name or something? Oh, good. Behind me!
I think I can help.
Targets identified. Neutralizing threats.
Neutralize us?
Looks like we're gonna have to fight our way through. What the?
Bypassing first and second firewalls. Hooking control protocols. Initiating hack.
Hey, D.I.
I said I am
Okay. Look, how about we call you Diana?
Diana?
Introducing Capcom's newest IP, Pragmata. An all-new science fiction action-adventure with a unique hacking twist. It's been a while since we first announced it, but we're excited to have the game ready for you in 2026. Today we will go over some of the unique points of Pragmata. Encountering an android with a heart. You play as Hugh Williams, a member of a team sent to investigate a lunar research facility that's lost contact. When a lunar quake strikes, Hugh is separated from the team. He finds himself saved by Diana, an android girl.
There you are. All better.
Now they must work together to return to Earth. Hugh, a bit sarcastic, but a kind soul. And Diana, a curious and enigmatic android. This is how an unlikely adventure between a human and android begins. A mix of puzzle and action. In Pragmata, combat begins with disarming the enemy's armor. Otherwise, you will find it difficult to inflict any real damage. This is where Diana comes in. Let's use her hacking ability on this enemy. Moving the cursor through the panel, you take down their armor. And now, it's Hugh's turn. Take aim at the enemy's weak points. Passing through more blue nodes increases damage, and the enemy's armor stays exposed for longer. With an arsenal of unique weapons, take on the rampaging bots. What enemy will you hack first? What weapon will you use? Thinking on the fly in the heat of combat and how you handle the multi-sided situation will be key for success. We can't wait for you to try this compelling new combat system. The AI-controlled Lunar Research Station. In Pragmata, your adventures take place at a lunar research station. They are researching a new material that can be used to 3D print almost anything, from microchips to cars and giant structures. Now, however, the Lunar Research Station seems void of human activity. Only the lifeless world and the AI remain. Use your thrusters to move around the Lunar Research Station. You will also need to hack the systems blocking your progress. By combining their abilities, Hugh and Diana can explore this world together. Pragmata will be available on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, S, and Steam. This summer, we'll also have public hands-on for Pragmata. Experience the gameplay you just saw firsthand, including the thrilling combination of puzzle and action combat. We are looking forward to many more events where you can get your hands on Pragmata. Please look out for more information on Pragmata on our official social channels, website, and stores. And don't forget to follow and to add Pragmata to your wish list. Check out the latest trailer for Sagat.
番組をご覧の皆さん、こんにちは。ストリートファイター6のディレクター中山です。本日は私から皆様に最新情報をお届けいたします。6月5日に任天堂スイッチ2にもストリートファイター6を発売することができました。より多くの方々にゲームを遊んでいただいて、開発一同大変嬉しく思っています。また先日イヤー3に登場するキャラクターのラインナップも発表させていただきました。イヤー3ではサガット、クリムバイパー、アレックス、そしてイングリッドが登場する予定です。さて本日はイヤー3最初に登場するサガットの映像を少しだけではありますがご用意いたしました。どうぞご覧ください。
The Emperor of Muay Thai, Sagat, is ready for battle. Players can also get the World Tour experience with Sagat deep in the mountains of Thailand. The Emperor makes his landing on August 5th. To prepare for Sagat's release, the Sagat Arrives Fighting Pass will be available starting from July 4th. Premium rewards include Sagat's Wanderer avatar gear. And we've also prepared some throwback stickers and emotes. From Sagat's days as the boss of the original Street Fighter, we're also increasing the amount of content in the Fighting Pass that can be used in Fighting Ground.
Don't expect me to be a pushover.
Use EX Color. Ken's EX Color.
Come on! Now's not the time for jokes.
As well as art and effects to use with the game's Challenger customization feature. We're also prepping music tracks to use in fights and more for players. Please check it out. Finally, we have information about the long-anticipated Outfit 4 content. Check out the designs of the 7 characters that will receive Outfit 4 content with the Sagat update. Cammy, Luke, Chun-Li, Manon, Jamie, Kimberly, and Aki. We're continuing work on Outfit 4 content for these characters. And of course, are working on Outfit 4 for the rest of the roster. So please stay tuned.
本日の情報は以上となりますが、いかがだったでしょうか。今回ご紹介したキャラクターやファイティングパスなどについて皆様にお届けできるよう開発チーム一丸となって最終調整に取り組んでおります。後日サガットのゲームプレイトレーラーの公開も予定しておりますので楽しみにしていただければと思います。これからもストリートファイター6をどうぞよろしくお願いします。
Next, an update from Capcom Esports. We'd like to tell you about the Capcom Pro Tour, a global competition for the world's best players. Players the world over will battle it out in regional qualifying tournaments. The Capcom Pro Tour 2025 Singles Tournament Tour is now accepting entries. Anyone is welcome to join. Compete for a spot in the Capcom Cup 12 tournament, which will determine the world champion. Just like last year, the tournament will be held in the Ryogoku Kokugikan Arena in Japan. The champion of this year's tournament will once again receive a whopping $1 million prize. You won't want to miss out on the intense battles this year as players fight to become world champion. For more information about the tournament schedule and how to enter, check the Capcom Esports website. This acclaimed new fusion of action and strategy, Kunitsugami, Path of the Goddess, has released on the Nintendo Switch 2. In this original Japanese-inspired world, with exhilarating dance-like sword action, strategize and fight alongside villagers as you enjoy this unique game experience. You can also use the new features of the Switch 2 and play using mouse controls. Have fun playing with the controls you want. Compatible with handheld mode, you can enjoy the game anytime, anywhere. Kunitsugami, Path of the Goddess is available now. Also, the action and strategy is further enhanced with the new extra content, Otherworldly Venture, added to all available platforms. In the Otherworld beyond the Torii gates, protect the maiden from nightly attacks of the sea. As you earn rewards by outlasting each wave of enemies. On an ever-changing battlefield, determine who will fight and win, and how to best use your rewards. Aim for a high score amid infinite strategies in this challenging and satisfying gameplay mode. How long will you be able to defend the maiden from the seethe in the Otherworld? Following its initial release on July 19th last year, Kunitsugami, Path of the Goddess, will celebrate its one-year anniversary next month. We have prepared a small token of our appreciation for the many fans who have played the game. Presenting Yashichi Waves, a Mazo talisman that changes some music in the main game to 8-bit style. This can be obtained in a free update available at a later date to both new and existing players. Please look forward to the update coming soon. Kunitsugami, Path of the Goddess is available now on all shown platforms. Try the game's unique experience for yourself now. next, please take a look at today's lineup of Capcom titles. 8 action and fighting games make their returns, including the legendary Capcom vs. SNK series. Enjoy training mode and a gallery featuring sounds and artwork, as well as easy-to-use one-button specials. Capcom Fighting Collection 2 is available now. Reclaim Your Destiny. A remaster from the swordplay action series Onimusha. A memorable cast of characters returns to weave their deep and complex tale anew. Experience the classic graphics and gameplay refined for modern consoles. The remaster of Onimusha 2 Samurai's Destiny is available now. Onimusha Way of the Sword. The next entry in the swordplay action game series is coming in 2026. Set in early Edo period Kyoto, the protagonist Miyamoto Musashi will face his formidable rival Sasaki Ganryu. How will the clash between them unfold? Stay tuned for more. Capcom Digital Sale is here. Monster Hunter Wilds is on sale for the first time. Experience the most evolved action and improved immersion in any Monster Hunter to date. Also, make sure to check out other Monster Hunter games. In celebration of the horror series' latest thrilling news, Resident Evil games are on sale at great prices. But that's not all. Dragon's Dogma 2, Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection Arcade Classics, Ace Attorney titles, and more are on sale too. Don't miss out on this great chance to pick up these must-play hit games. From the creators of the latest Resident Evil.
開発のコンセプトは病みつきになる恐怖というのを掲げてます。恐怖を乗り越えるね、気持ちよさ、そこのカタルシスってやっぱこう脳汁が出るんですよね。それ自体がもっとやりたい、遊びたいっていう中毒性を生む。そこに徹底的にフォーカスしてみたら怖いけどゲームとしても楽しい、そういうのが作れるんじゃないかなっていうのがレクイエムの出発点でした。
バイオハザードレクイエムは、シングルプレイかつ、オフラインのゲームとなっています。バイオハザードで一番重要なのは恐怖体験だと思うんですけれども、今作においてはその恐怖体験っていうところに、しっかりとフィーチャーした内容に仕上がっているんじゃないかなと思ってます。
今回の主人公は FBI 捜査官グレース・アッシュクロフト。内向的で怖がり、バイオハザードとしては割と新しいタイプのキャラクターを作ろうとしています。プレイヤーと同じ目線で一緒になって怖がれる、こういうキャラクターを狙っています。物語の中でもちろん彼女も恐怖を克服し成長していくんですけども、 FBI 捜査官なので銃の扱いも慣れてますし、冷静な推理力とかも発揮しつつ活躍するキャラクターになってます。レオンを主人公にしようっていうのは実はずっとあったんですけども、どうしてもレオンを使ったバッチバチのホラーっていうのが割と難しくて、落ちてきたバケツにびっくりするとか、そういうレオンってそんなみんな見たくないやろっていうところで、じゃあホラーと食い合わせ悪いよなっていうのがやっぱりありましたけど、
ファーストトレーラーご覧になって分かるように、グレース自身がすごいいろんな目に遭うんですね。 PV で断片的には入ってるんですけれども、逆さずり一つとっても顔の赤らみ、高揚感であったりとか、うっ血してる表現、あとは髪の毛もかなり力を入れてまして、自分たちでスタッフと一緒にプロの方を呼んで実際にウィッグを使ってそこからシミュレーションして CG に落とし込んだりとかもしています。
バイオハザードレクイエムはですね、一人称視点と三人称視点2つの視点で自由に切り替えながら遊ぶことができます。主観視点だとその恐怖を間近に感じることができて、緊張感のある臨場感のあるゲームプレイっていうのが可能になります。三人称視点だとキャラクターの肩越しでの視点というところでアクション、そういったところがよく見えるゲームプレイになると思いますので、アクションが好きだなって思う方には三人称視点の方がおすすめです。
滅菌作戦以降30年近く経つんですけども、ゲームの舞台として登場します。
その当時アンブレラ事件っていうのでシリーズがヒットして、それ以降もさまざまなキャラクターたちが、いろんなラクーンシティって起きた事件をきっかけに立ち向かっていくようになったり、人間成長したり、そこに今回この表現のメスを入れるっていうのが作り手としてはやっぱりかなり緊張感を持って臨ませてもらったっていうのが大きかったですね。
ラクーン事件に関わった、もしくはラクーン事件に巻き込まれて大きく人生を変わってしまったり、命を落としてしまったりと、そういった登場人物がたくさん出ます。レクイエムは彼らに向けての言葉通り鎮魂であり、もっと言うとバイオハザードシリーズ、ラクーン事件、アンブレラをきっかけに生まれたシリーズのある種一つの区切りという意味でレクイエムというタイトルをつけています。
バイオハザードレクイエムは2026年2月27日に発売予定です。2026年3月にバイオハザードシリーズ30周年を迎えます。30周年記念タイトルの名に恥じぬようなゲームとして本作リリースしたいなというふうに思っております。
グレースの母親は
大きく方針を転換してですね、
実写映画を目指すというところで。
Further interviews with the creators that didn't fit into today's presentation will be released today on the Resident Evil portal. Register your Capcom ID to see the rest.
ラクーンシティっていうところは基本触っちゃいけないもんだと。
Get ready, hunters. The Guild has authorized a new Monster Hunter showcase for you.
皆さんこんにちは。モンスターハンターワイルズプロデューサーの辻本です。おかげさまで多くのハンターの皆様に楽しんでいただいております。本当にありがとうございます。今日はタイトルアップデート第2弾の情報をディレクターたちと一緒にご紹介したいと思います。それではご紹介いたします。
はい、モンスターハンターワイルズアートディレクター藤岡要です。お願いします。
はい、モンスターハンターワイルズディレクターの徳田です。よろしくお願いします。
はい、それでは早速ですが、無料タイトルアップデート第2弾のプロモーション映像をご覧ください。どうぞ。
Don't get views like this sitting around back at base camp.
はい、というわけでいよいよ皆様にラギアクルスのお話ができる日がやってまいりましたと。これ本当にグローバルいろんなところに行っても本当にラギア人気がすごくってすごい期待されて
すごい期待。
今回ようやく皆様に、登場させることをお知らせできたと。実は「モンスターハンタートライ」っていうタイトルからラギアクルスっていうのが出てるんですけど、そこはちょっとラギアクルスの開発秘話的なところ、
モンスターハンタートライを立ち上げましょうってなって、売りになる遊びとかを水中戦とかも作ろうみたいなのがあって、でその水中をよりちゃんと面白くするにはラギアクルスが結構面白くならんといかんっていうのもあって、でもともとレウスのライバルみたいな立ち位置をちゃんと作ろうみたいな、いろんな精鋭を集めてラギアチームみたいなの作ってね。
でその時にモンスターの担当してたのがまた徳田。
そうですね、藤岡さんがディレクターで、僕が初めて最初から企画の立ち上げから調整してリリースするところまで担当させてもらったメインモンスターというところで、チームラギアですね、みんなが日々より良いモンスターにするために意見とかアイデアっていうのをぶつけ合いながら、より良いモンスターに仕上げていく経験っていうのは振り返ってみるとクリエイターとしてもすごい大事な時間を過ごさせてもらったなみたいに思うようなモンスターですね。
そうね。ワイルズでのこだわりっていうのをちょっと皆さんにもご説明したいと思うんだけど、
今回は水中ちょっとアクセント的なイベント的なやり取りっていうのはできるんですけど、主にはやっぱり地上でもやり取りしていただくような設計に変えましたので、昨今のプレイヤーのアクションできる幅っていうのも広がりながら、そこに対応しつつ、しかもラギアクルスらしさみたいなものを残したアクション設計にするというところがまず一つこだわったところです。ラギアクルスってトライの時からそうだったんですけど、水中でのこのシルエット、縦に伸びた時のシルエットっていうのは本当にかっこよくて、そこの迫力っていうのをぜひ感じていただきたいというところがありましたので、武器を完全に振ることは自由に振ることはできないんですけれども、ちょっとイベント的な水中のアクションっていうのも今回、なんとか実装することができましたので、そこも含めて楽しんでいただけるようなモンスターに、仕上がったんじゃないかなと思います。
もちろんラギアクルスが出てくるというところで、討伐して素材とか、入手してもらったらもちろん武器とか防具が作れるっていうところは当然あると思うんですけど、そこら辺で何かあります？
久しぶりにこうやって出てくるので、全ての人がね楽しんでもらいたいので、総中コンとかも、ちょっとなかったのを出させていただいて、全種類揃えさせてもらってます。
僕たち思い入れ強いモンスターってことも今のスタッフたちも本当に分かってくれてますし、本当に一生懸命取り組んでくれました。
なかなか面白い仕上がりになってると思います。
チェックするときに担当じゃない子たちとも見に来たりとかもするぐらいBGM とかもすごく
そうね、ぜひ遊んでいただいてね、その辺はね、注目していただけたらと思っております。そしてなんとセルレギオスが今回登場しますということで、セルレギオスはもともとモンスターハンター 4G というタイトルから登場しているタイトルで、モンスターハンター4の無印が実は海外版出てなくって 4G から出てるので、海外の人も結構セルレギオス馴染みある人も多いんじゃないかなとは思うんですけど、ちょっと今回のセルレギオスどんな感じになってるかっていうちょっと説明を軽くでもしてもらったら。
もともとセルレギオスは結構旋回能力高くて、レウスと違ってちょっと小回りの利く感じとスピーディーなやり取りみたいなのがもともとのコンセプトにあったんで、そのあたりちょっと今回なんですね。
モンスターハンター 4G の時も僕がメインプランナーとして、自ら概要から調整まで行った最後のモンスターなんですけど、足の攻撃だと人輪をうまく使ってもうテンポ感を作っていて、で後ろの回し切りを使って仕留めてくるようなタイプのモンスターなんですけど、4G の時にモーションの子が提案してくれて面白かったのが、斜めのキックしながら移動するみたいなアクションがあったんですけども、上下左右にステップするモンスター多くても斜め方向にしかも攻撃あたりを出しながらやるモンスターっていうのがあまりいなくて、そこの特徴がすごく面白いモンスターだなと思ってましたので、今回もその部分っていうのをアップグレードして自分のアクションをぶつけていきながら遊べるようなモンスターとしてセルレギオスは機能してくれてるんじゃないかなというふうに思います。 今ご紹介しましたラギアクルスとセルレギオスは、いずれも星8の、歴戦の個体として、フィールドに登場するようになります。かなり強力なモンスターになってはおりますので、腕に自信のある方はぜひチャレンジしてみてください。
For the second Arch-Tempered monster, we'll have Arch-Tempered Uth-Duna appear for a limited time. You'll be able to forge the new armor sets, Uth-Duna Gamma and Feline Uth-Duna Gamma. Arch-Tempered Uth-Duna will arrive in the future as an event quest and free challenge quest. Crafting the final weapon in a tree allows you to use that weapon as layered equipment. For Artian weapons, you'll get it after fully reinforcing the Rarity 8 weapon. For Palico weapons, you'll need to forge high-rank weapons. We're adding brightness settings and filter effects to photo mode. And in the Character Display tab, you'll be able to hide your handler, Palico, Sacred, and more. We're planning on continuing to update photo mode to make it easier to use. We've added the ability to swap handlers. You'll now be able to travel with Eric instead of Alma. As for support hunters, Mina, a hunter from Vespai unit who wields a sword and shield, will be added. You'll also now be able to select which support hunters participate in quests. Furthermore, by playing with content added in the update, you'll be able to obtain a myriad of rewards. Event quests that allow you to forge special equipment. Quests that make it easier to obtain armor spheres and decorations. A challenge quest featuring Mizutsune. And a free challenge quest featuring Arch-Tempered Uth-Duna will be available for a limited time.
はい、ここでコラボジェスチャーが入手できるイベントクエストについてお知らせしたいと思います。フェンダさんよりモンスターハンター20周年を記念したコラボレーションギターモンスターハンターリオレウステレキャスターが3月21日から発売しております。で、ゲームの方ではですね、期間限定で配信予定のイベントクエストをクリアすることで、こちらのギターが登場するコラボジェスチャーがなんと入手できますということになっております。今回のコラボはコラボが決まった時から結構チームもね、ノリノリでいろいろやってくれて、いろいろな今回こだわりがあるんですけど、ちょっといくつか紹介してもらえます？
ギターはそのまままず 3D スキャンを、自社で撮れるのがあるので、そのままの形がゲームに出せるようにして、使用感とかそういうのもちょっとデザイナーのこだわりの部分で足してあげたりとかして、実際のちょっと使用感のあるような、ところまでこだわって再現してますと。音自体も実際のサウンドチームの人が演奏してくれて、その音そのまま使ってるんですけど、アニメとかもそのキャプチャー撮る時も、サウンドのその演奏者の方にちゃんと指の動きを習ってコードが間違ってないかとか、チェックしてもらいながら全部のモーションをしっかり撮ってますんで、それなりに楽しいジェスチャーになってるんじゃないかなと思います。来週会場とかでもすごく映えるいいですねジェスチャーになるんじゃないかなと思います。
キャプチャー撮ってたじゃないですか。アイルームめっちゃ踊ってたじゃないですか。あれも実際にジェスチャーしたらオトマアイルームもあれをやってくれるってことですよね。
エアギターみたいなのをビーンってやって一緒に入って、はい、一緒にうわーって
めっちゃ弾けてたね。
もう全然関係なくわーもう音もらしい
まあそういうのもぜひ見てほしいですね。
楽しくみんなで楽しんでもらえたらなと思います。
はい、みんなぜひジェスチャーやっていただけたらと思います。
はい。
There will be a range of DLC with this title update as well. There will be 4 kinds of dance gestures as free DLC. And a cosmetic DLC Pack 2 as paid DLC. Those with the Premium Deluxe Edition or the Cosmetic DLC Pass will automatically obtain it. There will also be other DLC not included in packs. In the summer, there will be a seasonal event called Festival of Accord Flame Fate. During seasonal events, the decorations and meals at the Grand Hub will change, and by playing during the event, you will be able to get limited time only equipment, gestures, pop-up camp decorations, and more. Festival of Accord Flame Fate will begin July 23rd. Let's make this summer a hot one to remember.
ここからは今後のスケジュールについておさらいいたします。無料タイトルアップデート第2弾はご覧の日程で配信予定です。追加モンスターラギアクルス、セルレギオスが登場します。また武器の重ね着装備などシステム追加を予定しています。夏の季節イベント交わりの祭事踊り火の儀を開催します。イベントクエストにて歴戦王ウズトゥナが登場します。フェンダースペシャルコラボのジェスチャーが入手できるイベントクエストを期間限定で配信します。はい、今ご紹介、いろいろさせてもらいましたが、他にも細かい調整とか入ってるところもあるんですよね。
はい。タイトルアップデート第2弾では、ハンマーの調整として新しく、ハンマー相殺成功した後に追撃するモーションというのを追加しています。その他もですね、遊びやすくなる調整っていうのを、各種進めておりますので、詳細はディレクターレターやパッチノートの方をご確認いただければと思います。
番組をご覧いただきありがとうございました。タイトルアップデート第2弾の詳しい情報は公式サイトや SNS をご覧ください。タイトルアップデート第3弾は秋頃に配信予定です。追って皆様に情報をお届けする予定ですのでお待ちいただければと思います。本日はこれにて以上となります。最後は、いつもの掛け声で、終わろうと思っております。よろしいでしょうか。はい、いきますよ。せーの。一狩り行こうぜ。
That does it for today's presentation. Thank you for watching. Before you go, we'll be holding a survey about today's show. Viewers of this broadcast are invited to take part on the Capcom Spot.
Welcome to IGN Summer of Gaming. We just wrapped the Capcom Spotlight, and we're going to break it all down for you. I'm Nick Lamone, joined by John Davison and Matt Kim. Hello. Welcome, guys. Let's talk about the biggest announcement of the Capcom Spotlight. Let's jump into Resident Evil Requiem. Not RE9 Requiem, Resident Evil Requiem. Also known as Resident Evil 9.
It's baked in.
Make your mind up, Nick. So yeah, we got a look at the game, and I think for the longest time, people were speculating that there's going to be a dual protagonist in Resident Evil Requiem, and they straight up confronted that heads on, saying, we thought about putting Leon in this game, but yeah, it just doesn't make sense to put him in here since this is a horror-centric game. John, how do we feel about this being more, going back to what we saw with something like Resident Evil 7, more oriented towards straight-up horror?
I think it's good. I think maybe Silent Hill's keeping them on their toes now. I think, you know, we're going back to something that it definitely looks like it's going to be a little slower paced, a little more kind of ponderous, and going back. I mean, they're talking about going back to something like really tapping into the horror. I mean, it seems obvious them stating that horror has always been a part of Resident Evil, but like I think really kind of tapping into that, and like it definitely looks like they're playing with lighting and making it feel kind of like spooky rather than just sort of like throwing monsters at you. So I think it looks like they're actually looking to completely reboot the franchise, frankly. I mean, that seemed to be what they were intimating, is that they're skipping forward in time. They're
30 years later.
They're kind of brushing a lot of the, like, they're kind of putting a lot of the history of the franchise behind them so that they can start fresh, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah, I mean, when we first saw this during Summer Games Fest, we saw visions of a bombed-out Raccoon City, which is not something we've typically seen in a lot of the more modern Resident Evil games. So, Matt, you've actually gotten hands-on with Requiem. How does this stack up to what you've seen? Is this exactly what you saw during your time with the game?
Yeah, I mean, as we see now, there's a clip of her reloading a gun. So the part that I played had no combat whatsoever, right? But for the most part, everything that I saw today was fairly close to what I played. So I got a 30-minute hands-on. I was able to try out both the first-person and third-person mode, which is, you can switch in the options menu. But everything they're saying about the horror, or like focusing on the horror, is absolutely true from what I played. Like it was definitely like a slow pace, sort of like you hear, bumps in the night, and the things, the hallways turn dark, or they turn like scary bright all, at a flicker, and you don't know what's gonna happen. And Grace also, like they were mentioning how Grace is a sort of like a inexperienced sort of heroine who is not like a Leon. She does get scared.
She's a data analyst.
She's a data analyst. She can't do roundhouse kicks, right? And
Yet,
right? You learn on the job. But you definitely get that. I definitely got that from my playthrough too. You get a lot of feedback from her. Like there's a lot of like her making like her going like, oh my god, when like reacting to scary things in real time, and you definitely feel her fear, which I really appreciated. I really liked, and one thing I feel like I got the sense from is that Capcom really likes this character. I think they designed this character very intentionally and like with a lot of purpose. So it makes sense that they kind of want to focus on her. So I'm kind of glad that they sort of addressed the Leon rumors, but said, no, this is Grace. This is our new protagonist, because it really shows like from what I played, they put a lot of detail into her. So.
Yeah, it really like looking at the director of this game, it kind of harkens back to Resident Evil 7 in multiple ways. The director of Resident Evil Requiem is Koshi Nakanishi. Again, he directed Resident Evil 7, which was the first time the series went into first person proper, I guess, on console. We won't count Dead Aim or stuff like that, or Gaiden. But apart from that, that was a game that really did a soft reboot of the franchises, making it feel more horror-centric, and just it kind of brought the fear back to Resident Evil. It's something that we kind of lost a little bit with the original Resident Evil 4, and then RE5 straight up threw it out the window. So it was nice, and 6 is a lot. But 7 really brought the franchise back to its horror roots, setting it in a rural, like, Georgia bayou setting. Very unique and directly inspired by stuff like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I'm very curious to see what they do with Resident Evil 9. But let's talk a little bit about Grace Ashcroft. She's a character, the daughter of a character from a spin-off title on the PS2, Resident Evil Outbreak. Like, I love that Capcom is willing to get niche and like obscure with how they are bringing back all of the connective tissue from previous games. So how do we feel about it being just a Joe Schmo character, as opposed to your Leon S. Kennedy, your Chris Redfield, your Claire Redfield?
I think it makes it more interesting, because you could have too many badasses in these things, and I think I mean, again, I mentioned Silent Hill. I think part of the beauty of Silent Hill was always it was just some guy stumbling into something, and I think not being a badass and not kind of escalating the character to kind of superhero status allows you to kind of play around with the horror, and you can make more mundane things horrific, right? Because when your character is a badass, you have to escalate the threat. Whereas if she's a data analyst, she can like something.
There's tension.
There's tension in just something mildly scary happening. Versus with Leon, you had to throw something big at him, right? And I think this actually allows them to kind of bring it down and like because it's the same problem with superhero movies, right? Where you have to keep like making it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and just to the point where it gets ridiculous. And I think by bringing it back, it allows them to make the whole experience feel more intimate again, and that honestly will make it scarier.
Matt, what do we want from Resident Evil Requiem? Like, obviously, you've gotten hands-on within it. You've touched on a lot more of the horror stuff, the first person versus third person. Like, when I finished Resident Evil 7, I remember being all in on the horrors, but then you kind of get push-pull because you get rescued by Chris Redfield at the end of the game. I was like, okay, this isn't a reboot of the franchise. We're back to normal Resident Evil people in terms and whatnot. So how do we feel about Requiem in terms of what's next for the franchise, and this being a requiem for all that came before?
Yeah, so a lot of that was new information to me, right? So I got a little at Summer Game Fest, but the stuff about 30 years later after Raccoon City and it being a requiem, meaning, that this is going to be even a eulogy for some characters that we might know, that's all new information to me, and that's got me really excited. I do think it's come to a point where Resident Evil is sort of defined by a rotating cast of like 3 or 4 characters, and it's really exciting for them to know that like, hey, at some point we have to move on, and it seems like that's what they're doing here while being respectful to the characters that paved the way before. The fact that they're returning to Raccoon City after it was bombed by missiles at the end of Resident Evil 3 is a cool touch, and like honestly, the most exciting thing for me is the time jump. Like 30 years is not like a small insignificant time jump. I think Leon would be 50 some years old if he survived.
Right, 30 years from where? So let's place this game in actual time.
Right.
When would it be?
30 years after the bombing of Raccoon City.
Right, which
would be 3. When?
Resident Evil 2 and 3, which is like what, 1999?
1999, yeah.
Well, let me pull up a computer. You guys vamp.
So what they're doing is they're actually pulling the franchise so that it's contemporary to now.
Yeah, or even a little bit in the future.
Or slightly in the future, but like they've been kind of like playing around with a timeline that is increasingly in the past. So what they're actually doing is dragging it forward.
Yep.
I would imagine partly so that they can contemporize the technology a little bit.
Well, that hasn't stopped them before.
It was confirmed 1998 was the Raccoon City destruction. So this would bring it
2028.
2028. So near future. And putting this in the context of what we've seen with the Resident Evil 7 and 8 duology there, we got a little glimpse of our main character's daughter. We got a flash forward of her even further into the future. So this looks like it takes place even before that, if my calculations are correct.
Right.
Ethan Winter's daughter, and I cannot recall her name in this moment, but she is a psychic. She is a medium.
Rosemary Winter.
Rose Winter. Yes, that's correct. So I'm curious to see if that's still in contention with what we're seeing here with Requiem, because her DLC, in my opinion, wasn't all that fun to play, but I did appreciate that it brought a more supernatural touch to Resident Evil. One thing that always stands out about Resident Evil is like, Nick, what are you talking about? Zombies are supernatural as heck. Well, it's all science experiments gone wrong, really. There's never any actual...
It wasn't really any kind of like sort of like more magical... I mean, like they sort of drifted into psychic stuff a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was fundamentally, it was a virus that mutated things, and that was what was driving things. It was like monster stuff driven by something that was gone wrong, right? Whereas I think, maybe this is an opportunity for them to go, yeah, a bunch of stuff kind of like there was a knock-on effect from that,
Yeah, and like, what do we think this game is? Because in addition to confronting the Leon rumors head on, they also said this is a single-player experience. Is this an open world Resident Evil game? Is this semi-open world of what we saw with something like RE4 Remake, where it's just extremely large hubs with optional objectives that you can hit throughout? Like,
I mean, you
what
played
are we
it.
hoping to
Did you
see?
get any hint of that?
Yeah, no, so the portion I played felt very much like the house portion in Resident Evil 7. You know, a very like self-contained little area. It's very, you know, it's set in Raccoon City, which means they have the same architect everywhere. Which means I think this is maybe the hotel that they were alluding to in the first trailer, but it was definitely like maybe the medical ward of a hotel because it was like a nurse's station. So it could have either been a hospital, could have been a hotel. There are random, you know, classic Gothic architecture elements in this hotel hospital place per, you know, Raccoon City design. But no, very self-contained, very like narrow hallways, no real sense that this was going to open up into a broader open world thing. But again, it was just like one 30-minute slice.
Snippet.
Yeah, a snippet. So who's to say for the full thing?
You know, I touched a little bit earlier that Resident Evil 7 was very directly inspired by stuff like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think Resident Evil Village was a snapshot of different genres of horror. You got your supernatural horror with, you know, the very scary large baby. You got the, you know, body modification horror in the underground laboratory, as well as your Resident Evil 4 homages with the game's opening chapter. What do we think? Is there anything that we can glean from what we've seen so far? We've seen the FBI, we've seen a bombed out Raccoon City.
We didn't see any monsters though, right?
No monsters, but you actually talked about that in your preview, that there is a barbarian inspired monster.
Yeah, there was no monster in today's show, but I did play the demo that I played did include a monster, and it's one of those large stalkery type monsters that Resident Evil is known
Another
for.
Mr. X?
Another Mr. X, but this one it reminded me very much of the monster in Barbarian. You know, it was not. I don't think it was a tyrant. You know, some people who've seen her and played the demo also have kind of likened her to Lisa.
That's exactly what I was about to bring up. I was like, what's Lisa up to these days? If this is revisiting Raccoon City, what got left behind in those ruins?
I mean, I can't confirm whether or not it is Lisa, but it's definitely like of that mold, right? Definitely not a Mr. X or a Nemesis, closer to a Lisa, but also really huge and just, I don't know, just reminds me of the main monster from Barbarian, the movie that I love, and whose director will be making the next Resident Evil movie, which is super fun.
Oh.
So you heard it here first. The enemy of the next Resident Evil game is Airbnb. Real quick, we need to take a quick break, but stick around because there's more to unpack from Capcom, the Capcom Spotlight right here on IGN Summer of Gaming.
IGN Summer of Gaming is presented by FX's Alien Earth. Premieres August 12th on FX and Hulu. Hey, what are you doing on June 7th and 8th? If you said anything but going to IGN Live, you're missing out. Get hands-on with new and upcoming games, be front row for celebrity interviews, developer deep dives,
and welcome to IGN Live.
Live tapings of all your favorite IGN shows,
roll the thing,
free merch, exclusive looks at what's new from Netflix, Xbox, IDW, 2K Sports, and more. It's a huge party and you're invited.
There's real fans, and I love that.
Get your tickets today at IGN.com/live.
Can't find that final collectible you're missing? IGN strategy guides and interactive maps are here to help.
One step at a time.
IGN guides are trusted by millions, easy to use, and best of all, free. IGN has the very best, most complete and accurate guides for Shadow of the Erdtree, Baldur's Gate 3, Tears of the Kingdom, and so much more.
See? It's good, right?
Every guide is tested and verified for you by experts. Just search for IGN when you search for guides.
IGN Plus is where your adventure begins.
What are you selling?
Plus is the place to get unlimited access to all the tools you need to beat your games.
Here's what you need to know for bringing down Gloomspawn.
Plus, awesome exclusive discounts on IGN Store.
Maybe this would tease open your money pouch.
Plus, ad-free browsing on IGN.com. Plus, unlimited game help tools like premium interactive maps with your own custom map markers, filters, marker notes, and more.
This will come in handy.
Plus, access to sweepstakes, giveaways, and free game keys.
Wow! Exactly.
Want more? Head to IGN.com/plus and start your adventure today.
Hello again, and welcome back to IGN Summer of Gaming. We're going to be talking about some of the highlights from the Capcom Spotlight. We just finished talking about Resident Evil Requiem, but now I want to talk about a little sci-fi adventure game called Pragmata. Not Pragmata, Pragmata. We think.
You saying it with a Boston accent?
Pragmata.
Pragmata.
Folks, how do we feel about Pragmata? Yeah, why the apprehension? Let's talk about it.
I think it looks like they couldn't decide what they wanted to make, so they just mashed two things together. I think it looks like it's gonna not be very good.
Yeah.
Matt, how do we feel about that?
I'm waiting to see more, but it's true that all we got at the very first time they announced Pragmata was this futuristic sci-fi little like teaser.
2022, right?
And that got delayed and it disappeared for a while, and then we saw it again, and it looks very pretty. And even after the gameplay showcase, I still don't fully know what I'm gonna get with that.
It reminds me of the kind of stuff that we used to see get squeezed out on PS2, only it looks a lot prettier.
Yeah, I mean, but see, I think you just unlocked what makes me excited about this game, a thing that I don't think shows well in a presentation like this is, out of everything we saw today, apart from the obvious known quantities like Street Fighter, I think Pragmata is the most video game ass PS2 game I've seen in a minute, because every time they show it, you just think over-the-shoulder third-person shooter. You shoot the robots and you move on and defend the little girl.
I hope it is fun, but it kind of looks a bit like, oh god, I've got to walk backwards doing this damn puzzle and then shoot the thing. It just looks.
But doing them simultaneously now,
looks
that's
annoying.
where you got
It just looks annoying.
You have to balance the left and right side of your brain at the same time. Improvisational combat combined with the BioShock pipe connecting minigame. I love it. It's so video gamey.
You really want to play a shooter where you have to walk backwards all the time?
I think that it's a type of mechanic that people are like, there's no way this is going to be like legit something we can base an entire 20-hour experience on.
I like that it reminds me of Vanquish, and then it reminds me of like bits of BioShock I didn't like.
But when you combine them with RE4 shooting with the BioShock minigame, I think it'll lend its way for some interesting improvisational combat where you're swapping between weapons and also doing a puzzle game at the same time. But apart from that, do we think, in the years since this game's original release, do people care about it anymore?
No.
I think a lot of people, kind of forgot about this, and so this, this summer has been its grand re-unveiling, and I think, I don't know.
The trailer did pretty well. So I think one of the things they have to their advantage is that people are starved for new stuff, and I think there is some curiosity around it.
It's a good-looking game,
and it's a good-looking game, right? But I don't think it looks fun.
I think it looks.
But you think it looks because apparently.
But like the one thing that has me genuinely concerned about this game is its like rote setting of like, in the future, did you know that maybe AI could be human? Did you know artificial intelligence could be more human than human? How do we feel about its overall like set dressing and things like that? Because it's a story we've seen since the original Blade Runner, since science fiction was a thing. Is what if robot but human? Is this tired territory? Is there something still that we can glean from this sci-fi, this tired sci-fi concept?
Well, the thing about Blade Runner is that all the robots in Blade Runner were depressed, and the android in this one doesn't seem depressed, so that's a key difference.
That is true. She is a very kawaii and animated style android girl. But how do we feel about our new character, Hugh Williams, the sarcastic...
The human named Hugh Williams.
That just hit me. Is this game RE Engine? Has that been confirmed yet? It seems like RE Engine. It has the facial features.
It had the little RE Engine logo at the tail end of the commercial, so it is.
I think that's all the folks need, all the fans at home need to try out a new Capcom game. Because
and that'll give you an idea what the combat feels like, I think, right? So, I mean, it does. I mean, you mentioned it. It looks like RE combat, the shooting. I mean, that one pop where he was like walking backwards, shooting at the guy's head. It did look like that.
Yeah, and
there you go, walking backwards. Walking backwards. Thank God for that.
In that same vein, as in the way that you got hands-on with Resident Evil Requiem, Michael Hyam of IGN also got hands-on with Pragmata. Pragmata, and he talked about the hacking minigame a little bit more comprehensively, talking about how not only is it just connecting your pipe from point A to C, but on your way to connect the pipes from start point to end point, there are optional nodes that you can attach that will either deal additional damage, leave an enemy susceptible for damage even longer, things like that. So I'm curious to see what kind of variety that has and how that goes hand in hand with the kind of arsenal that's at your disposal. Because one of my favorite things about the modern RE4, or I guess all of the Resident Evil games, is every time you get a new toy, you always want to see how it kind of interacts with all of your existing toys.
Yeah.
So that combined with this sort of almost RPG like enemy weakness system that they're working here, where it's like, oh, I gotta figure out how to, I love my shotgun, but I don't really have a lot of time to use it. Trying to optimize a hacking path in order to open yourself up for weapons that you like to use.
One thing I do wonder is why they've spent all this time explaining the stuff they're mining on the moon, because I would imagine it has some relevance to the story and hopefully to items in the game, right? They're mining this stuff that you can manufacture, you can 3D print anything. So hopefully there is an element to this game where there is either some crafting or some ability to that is not just here is why there's a bunch of different kind of flavors of robot, right? I would like the fact that they're bothering to explain that there is this adaptable material, I hope is relevant to the experience.
Why not build a bridge to get home? I don't understand. You can just print it out. But no, you raise a great point. Like, I think that there is more that they're keeping under wraps, and who knows, maybe we'll get a little bit of a glimpse at it at Gamescom, but we saw some platforming sections of him navigating a multi-tiered space facility on the moon. I'm getting like Dead Space 1.
I was getting Dead Space as well, yeah.
The fact that they, Dead Space 1 segmented game, but the remake itself opened up the entire space station, so it kind of transformed it into an
with the 0G bits.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm hoping that there's a little glimpse of a taste of Metroidvania here, stuff to find and uncover, because even the Resident Evil 4 remake decided to inject some like optional side content. So I'm hoping that they're learning a lot more from what they've done with Resident Evil. And part of me wonders if this was a Resident Evil game at some point set in space and like, you know what, let's make a new IP.
Yeah.
Because it certainly shows echoes of that. But I'm curious now, this is a little bit of a deep cut, so please bear with me. Are people more excited? Would people be more excited to play this, or if Capcom just dropped an announcement that Deep Down was still a thing? Do we remember Deep Down?
Wow,
way back when?
Wow.
Because I feel like those games were not shown at the same time, but within close enough proximity to one another where I'm like, for the longest time, I thought this was their next Deep Down, where it's just a game we saw once and then it'd be gone forever.
Well, with Dragon's Dogma, they have the dark fantasy RPG space covered now, so this is new territory for them that we haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, nope, completely agreed. But overall temperature check, you're meh.
Yeah.
Matt, where do you lie?
I need to see more.
You need to see a little bit more. As for me, I am cautiously optimistic. I want some more third-person over-the-shoulder shooting with a fun little sidekick.
Really underrepresented genre.
Do we think that our AI companion is going to be a pain, though? Is this our new Atreus?
Oh, you really don't like Atreus, do you?
No, well, he tells you the answers to all the puzzles every step of the way of your journey. It's like, I'm an adult Atreus. I know things. I've learned things.
The fear is there. There's a good possibility. But, again, who knows? Like, she's not depressed like Blade Runner androids. So there's that.
Diana.
I mean, you are kind of switching between because like when you do the puzzle, you're controlling her, right? Is like your fear that like she'll do stuff when you're not controlling her?
Hey, you idiot! Here, let me hack this thing for you. Like, I'm curious if there is some sort of system in place that if you are really bad at operating,
that she'll just do it.
Both sides of things. If there's like a you don't get any bonus features from the hacking, but she'll just get the job done kind of thing. So I'm curious if there's going to be this level of flexibility in terms of what we can do in Pragmata. But regardless, I'm curious about its, utopian, hard sci-fi that's talking about real things. It seemed very odd that they talked about generative AI. I was like, it's the 3D printer. What does generative AI have to do with this? So that remains to be seen. But regardless, next year.
It's very pretty.
Yeah.
That said, we have a lot of stuff that's next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does Capcom have lined up for this year that isn't, updates to Hammers and Monster Hunter?
I mean, there's that, and updates to Street Fighter.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any major releases planned. I was surprised that we didn't get any sort of announcement for Monster Hunter, like Switch 2.
I for sure thought there was going to be a Switch 2 port of Monster Hunter announced.
Is there anything that we might be missing?
No, just updates, right? Because it's updates to Street Fighter, updates to Monster Hunter, and even an update for Kunitsugami. So, maybe a update year, and then because they've got what? They got Resident Evil and Pragmata for next year.
We're cautiously pronouncing that. I am not even going to attempt to say its name with my accent.
Tomato. I wouldn't judge you one way or the other, but despite Capcom not having anything coming up anytime soon, we certainly do. We're going to take a quick break and talk a little bit more about the Capcom Spotlight shortly. See you soon.
IGN Summer of Gaming is presented by Lenovo Legion. Reach your impossible.
The Cinefix Top 100. A list so secretive even we don't know what movies are on it or where they rank.
What do you mean you don't know?
Each episode will reveal one of the movies.
Did I rush it? Felt like I rushed. That was good. I liked it.
Talk about why it belongs and finally find out where it ranks.
Are you not entertained?
Are any of the movies we've shown here even on the list? I have no idea, and it drives me crazy. Join us as we find out on Cinefix, IGN, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Why so serious?
Catch up on all your favorite shows with up-to-the-minute gaming and entertainment news with Geek Media Podcasts.
Welcome to a very special episode of IGN Game Scoop.
Game Scoop has you covered for all things gaming and the latest game releases. Tune into Podcast Beyond for the biggest PlayStation news.
Man, this is a cool looking trailer.
Everything Xbox on Podcasts Unlocked.
This is Steve Downs, the voice of Master Chief.
Catch up with your Super Nintendos on Nintendo Voice Chat.
Switch 2 pre-order Mania. It was chaotic last night.
And get all the latest console news and rumors with Next Gen Console Watch.
Now Xbox and Phil Spencer are even saying that a mid-gen refresh isn't even necessary.
The Cinefix Top 100 podcast picks a movie every week to celebrate and debate.
It's kind of every movie's grandpa.
Geek Media Podcasts, the best podcasts from around the world.
IGN Playlist is the best way to track your game collection. Now you can even import your entire Steam library to Playlist, making it easier than ever to review games, show off your collection to the world, and finally chip away at that massive backlog you keep meaning to get to. IGN Playlist, check it out.
Can't find that final collectible you're missing? IGN guides are trusted by millions, easy to use, and best of all, free. IGN has the very best, most complete and accurate guides for Shadow of the Erdtree, Baldur's Gate 3, Tears of the Kingdom, and so much more.
It's good, right?
Every guide is tested and verified for you by experts. Just search for IGN when you search for guides.
Welcome back to IGN Summer of Gaming. We're talking about everything we saw in the Capcom Spotlight. What do we want to talk about, guys? I want to talk about a little bit about Kunitsugami. Did we play Kunitsugami?
I have not played it, but I kind of want to now.
It's a beautiful game. Have you, Matt?
I have not. I heard good things.
Like they said, it released last year. It was
Did you play it?
Kind of flew under the radar. Yeah, I played the game. I really enjoyed it.
Have you played everything?
Unfortunately not, but I can try. But Kunitsugami is a really interesting mashup of, in the year 2025, it feels like nobody's making new stuff anymore. It feels like no one's pushing the boundaries of genre in video game. And then, Capcom decides to release this small niche game, I'd argue.
Turn-based combat.
Not even turn-based. No, it's almost equal parts real-time strategy and Pikmin. Where you're kind of getting units, upgrading them, crafting them, and then you are placing them throughout a map and escorting this priestess as she's purifying this demon-controlled land. But not only that, you can, of course, sit back as the commander and just watch all of your mapping unfold and see how everything works. But you can also directly possess your units and actually fight them as if they're a third-person action game, a la something like Onimusha. So it's just this strange hybrid that harkens back to, I forget which Command and Conquer game it was, but it was an RTS that you could assume the direct control of a unit in first person. Obviously not first person, but third person here, but just a bizarre, beautiful game that taps into this, Japanese traditional imagery and music and just Very good game, highly recommended. They just dropped an update for the game as well, so there's even more stuff to do in it now. And they added a cute little dude who will turn all the game's music into 8-bit now, which is a nice, cute little touch. But apart from Kunitsugami, we also got an extensive look at what Capcom has planned for Monster Hunter Wilds. And I think I'm going to be upfront with it. I'm a little bit disappointed with what we saw with the Monster Hunter Wilds showcase, because I'm playing that game on PC right now, and it does not perform particularly well.
No, it does not.
And I think that the rest of the internet is also sharing in that sentiment, because the game has recently dipped, unfortunately, into the overwhelmingly negative territory on Steam. A lot of players citing that the game's poor performance has gotten worse and worse with each update in the game. So I'm not sure if it's a memory leak or something, but I was assuming that they would take this as an opportunity to...
The single most powerful thing they could have done is come out and say, we have a massive patch for the PC version of the game to optimize it. Yeah. And they wouldn't have needed to even talk about any monsters. That would have been... Because the majority of people playing Monster Hunter are playing on PC. Were playing on PC, certainly.
How else are you going to learn about the Fender collab that they've got going on?
That was a weird one, huh?
Yeah.
Very strange. But Matt, how do we feel about the lack of addressing it? Obviously, you know, they know their game far better than us, but it just seems like a strange thing to not address or even pose the idea of, we will take a look at it.
I mean, yeah, strategy-wise, it is interesting, right? Because in the Resident Evil segment, they addressed the rumors online about the Leon thing pretty head-on. You know, they were like, hey, some people have said that there might be a secret Leon dual protagonist system. We chose to not use Leon, and that was a clear statement addressing the internet stuff. Here, they didn't address it at all. Like no mention, not even like a little offhand, like when they're like, oh, including in the updates are some performance updates or things like that. Like, no, I don't even think I saw anything like that. No. So very weird dual track strategy Capcom is employing with these two big franchises of theirs, and I think Monster Hunter comes out looking a little worse as a result of it.
Yeah, fortunately, I do think that they have a couple bones to throw for longtime fans. I know I certainly got excited when I saw the Lagia Cruise come back from Monster Hunter Tri, but it's just fascinating to me because, you know, going back, I think one of the things most people can agree on in the video game world is underwater levels are not particularly fun a lot, and Monster Hunter Tri was the game about underwater levels and fighting giant monsters underwater with the Wii remote, swinging your remote around trying to hit the thing. But regardless, I think that the Lagia Cruise, you know, Loch Ness Monster-esque design was always really fun. So seeing him come out in beautiful 4K glory, fighting against the Rathalos is very fun imagery. Apart from that, we also got the Seregios from Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, which was a 3DS game. So a lot of Nintendo ported monsters making their way to 4K, which I appreciate. But does this move the needle for anyone other than myself or Casey DeFreitas?
I thought that the Nintendo flavored like monsters was building towards.
It was keying up.
So we're putting it out on Switch 2.
How do we feel about lack of Switch 2 support? That seems like a no-brainer at this point.
Yeah, maybe we'll get a separate announcement, but it was very disappointing that I thought all of this sort of like, because there was a lot of housekeeping announcements that followed, right? It was like, here's the bone hammer thing, and here's a bunch of other stuff, and the guitar, and like, and some new dances, and I thought this was all, get all that out of the way, and then at the end, it was like, we were sat here going like, surely there's one more thing at the end, right? Which was going to be, and we're shipping it with all of these updates optimized for Switch 2, but no, nothing.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, Monster Hunter has always been, you know, synonymous with the handheld, and now Nintendo has a new, even more powerful one that maybe could run this new game, and they didn't announce it, and that's also a whiff, you know?
And it's strange, though, because Monster Hunter Rise was a big deal for the Nintendo Switch 1, so, you know, we thought that obviously Wilds was the one for the other consoles, and it just never found its way to Switch 2, at least not yet. But if nothing else, I think this does pose an interesting theory I have that I do think Capcom, despite how we might feel overall about what was shown today, I think Capcom is a company that is showing the players and the people who have bought in how you can do not games as a service, because that's a completely different term, but supporting a game in longevity. And I think they're doing it well. I think that they're teasing out their roadmaps in a way that feels good for Street Fighter fans, because we got a glimpse at their year ahead.
3 years now. We're going into year 3 of Street Fighter.
That's a lot, and people still seem to be loving the game. And despite Monster Hunter Wilds not quite being a year old, what is that release? February, March?
Yeah.
So there is, hope on the horizon for all of the things they plan on adding in the game. But I just would like to take a moment to say, I think Capcom's doing it right.
Yeah. I mean, I have a entire 45-so-minute documentary on this you can watch on our YouTube channel about Capcom's new golden age. And a lot of things that they do get right is they went back to their core franchises, Monster Hunter, Resident Evil, and they really focus on what made them good, and they care about these things, and they want to make each new one better. And one thing is, I think they're not afraid to look at some of their past, I wouldn't say failures, right? Because these, Resident Evil 6, for example, was a sales juggernaut. It's sold millions of copies. But at the same time, fans were divided on them, and they weren't afraid to go back and look at, okay, what did people not like about these? And it's not about just, giving fans, fan service and, okay, we're only going to give fans what they want. It's about, reconciling, their wants, which is they want to return Resident Evil to horror roots, but also, giving fans good games to play, And that's, honestly, it's not a lot of studios are doing that, you look at other AAA companies, and they aren't able to sort of revive their beloved IP in the same way that Capcom is able to. And why they can't is individual for every studio, but all I know is that Capcom has a way that they're doing it, and it seems to be working great for them, because the last couple Resident Evil games, the last couple the one Devil May Cry game that they released recently, the Monster Hunter games that they've been putting out, all very successful financially, critically.
Yeah, and honestly, you bring up a good point. It just, when you enjoy success with your AAA franchises that are under your belt, a la your Resident Evils, your Monster Hunters, and Street Fighters, I think it allows them some flexibility to take a chance on other things, your Kunitsugamis, your Pragmatas. I'm not saying Pragmata is going to be a small game, but just unknown.
I mean, it's a new IP, and that's always a risk these days.
But it seems like if Pragmata does not meet sales expectations, I think Capcom will be okay.
Right.
Is what I'm.
Well, I think the other thing that they're doing, I mean, with Street Fighter in particular, they were really smart in the way that they focused on it on a multi-year rollout and how they supported it, and I think they recognized that Street Fighter was their one kind of competitive game, and they supported the championship as an online thing, and they kind of waited out the pandemic by supporting online tournaments. And now, Evo is probably the last of in esports coming back. Fighting game tournaments are kind of leading the charge in the sort of return of esports, and I think people appreciate that because everyone can understand watching fighting games, right? And I think, and Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, the two games that are right at the center of that. There's a bunch of other games in Evo, but I think those two are the ones that everyone knows the names. They're easy to understand. People know the characters. So Capcom have done a really good job of leaning into that, and then they have their own tournament as well that they're constantly supporting, and they referenced it in this stream as well. I think they've been really smart about how they support that.
I think they're also very fortunate in that the FGC, the fighting game community for Street Fighter in particular, is just a pretty positive one and good vibes overall, and very energetic and fun.
Yeah.
And I think that really lends itself well.
Yeah, and they're constantly throwing content at it. I mean, they mentioned here these skins from previous games, and they're always dropping stuff in there so that there's this constant feeling of reward coming out of that. I mean, they have a massive roster of characters they can keep dipping into, so that as they're doing these iterative updates, they can kind of make an event out of a drop like Sagat, and I think they do it really well.
Yeah, I want to do a temperature check on IGN's Mitchell Salzman, see how he's feeling about seeing Sagat, and we'll be rooting for you when you try and qualify for those the open tournament, Mitchell. No pressure though. But unfortunately, that about does it for us today. We have plenty more coverage of all Capcom's upcoming games leading up to launch, so make sure you're following IGN wherever you like to watch. Before we go, I just want to shout out what's going on over at IGN's sister site, Humble. Every month, Humble Choice subscribers get a hand-picked mix of awesome PC games. This month's lineup includes Warhammer 40,000 Bolt Gun, Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver 1 and 2, Nobody Wants to Die, Dungeons of Hinterberg, and Chia. You get all of that for just $11.99 a month, which you can cancel at any time. But Get this, first-time Humble Choice subscribers can get their first month for just $7 by using the code June25. It's a great way to discover great games and help support great causes. Head over to humble.com to find out more. Matt, John, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to everyone working behind the scenes to make this stream possible, and most importantly, thanks to all of you watching at home. I'll see you next time.
IGN Summer of Gaming is presented by Nintendo Switch 2. All together, anytime, anywhere.
The average Cinefix movie list features nearly 100 different films and approximately 25 minutes worth of wall-to-wall deep dive analysis. To simulate that pace for this 30-second ad, we're featuring 26 different films, and before you say it, no, that math does not check out. We're not math people, we're movie people. We can't even count down from 10 without ending up at, like, 96. Subscribe to IGN Movies and TV for more Cinefix movie lists. Bad at math, great at movies.
Can't find that final collectible you're missing? IGN strategy guides and interactive maps are here to help.
One step at a time.
IGN guides are trusted by millions, easy to use, and best of all, free. IGN has the very best, most complete and accurate guides for Shadow of the Erdtree, Baldur's Gate 3, Tears of the Kingdom, and so much more.
See? It's good, right?
Every guide is tested and verified for you by experts. Just search for IGN when you search for guides.
IGN Plus is where your adventure begins.
What are you selling?
Plus is the place to get unlimited access to all the tools you need to beat your games.
Here's what you need to know for bringing down Gloomspawn.
Plus, awesome exclusive discounts on IGN Store.
Maybe this would tease open your money pouch.
Plus, ad-free browsing on IGN.com. Plus, unlimited game help tools like premium interactive maps with your own custom map markers, filters, marker notes, and more.
This will come in handy.
Plus, access to sweepstakes, giveaways, and free game keys.
Wow! Exactly.
Want more? Head to IGN.com/plus and start your adventure today.